Oh yeah, welcome back to the Geometric View, episode 76, season 7. Today was one of my favorite episodes. We get into parameterizing the Dougherty set, showing the actual numbers and stacking arrangement of the dilating toruses within toruses. It's like a forest of toruses. We also get into the Laplace transform.
So the 2022 Electromagnetic Universe World Expo was amazing. We'll be releasing the
link is in the
episodes
show notes
weekly
below
on this channel.
Let's get into the circuit.
The Geometric
Greatly
View.
appreciate your support. The best way to donate to us is on PayPal. Just send money directly to goldenscaling@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
And boom. So I have begun work on this idea of creating a curvature, a Gaussian curvature. Anyways, I think a better constant, because it turns out it's a distant base. And by the way, I did not know that when I started the work. I just began doing the work. I just converted G into joules and kiloelectron volts. Yeah, and then converted the joules also into a kiloelectron volts, and boom, out pops a distance. And this distance is way freaking smaller than the Planck length, which I also was incredibly shocked by. And you end up with kiloelectron volts per meter.
When they talk about the smallest size possible, my colleague is talking about 10 to the thousands.
Well, that's, again, possibly. But I'm interested in the fact that it is the number 60. I'm interested in the fact that it's so much smaller than the Planck length. I'm interested in the fact that the force ends up at kiloelectron volts per meter. And yes, I'm interested in I think we should have the velocity discussion here. That way it can be referenced to in the messy about it, right? Because I put links at the top. By the way, Robert, I decided to advertise your World Expo talk at the top here and the nature of things, and then I'll put a thing. And I forget my reason for that.
Can you put that in the chat?
We had something. What, his talk? Oh, you mean the
I did. Magic 14. Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I
so
did,
we can bring that up and you can focus us through it better than seeing it on a share screen. That's all.
Yeah. All right.
No,
if
you can do that. There it is.
There was a reason that I had mentioned you, and I have yet to get to it in the paper. But so then, I don't know. I wrote a whole bunch of crazy stuff last night. I was pretty tired, so let me even read. If curvature as proposed is related to the Gaussian curvature, curl in distances already expected, length contraction will follow observation changing. Distances being relative, the observer enmeshed in the relationship, and the force is being observed across a distance, but in relationship to another object moving relative to the field. Doesn't need fancy clocks. Okay, fair enough. It doesn't mean you cannot add these analyses, but Einstein was adding something already implied if the force is measured electrically. It is measured if it's merely related to a mass energy relationship with energy related through electron volts, then the charge field being curved also means for bending the observation. If it is not true that nothing can move faster than light, no more than it's true that there's no distance smaller than the Planck length, no temperature below 0 K. There is, however, nothing that vibrates in the ether faster than the rate of induction in the vacuous ether. Well, I must have been tripping balls when I wrote that. Okay, we do not know about the void. It's probably non-local, instantaneous. Yin and yang are not opposites, but actually quite different. Time doesn't exist in either case. It is observed in the mind driven reality, while scalar vectors fractals exist dimensionlessly in the SCS. Difference in the nature of reality and anti-reality. And that's as far as I got. And then I ran out of batteries. My voltage ran out, and the connection, there was no more to circulate the current. So I powered down. So what I thought is we could either start with the velocity, or we could start with the diagrammatica stuff and get to the velocity. Because I'm not sure, Jonathan, if you could give us where you were, because you had gone through, and I don't know how far you got before you were popping off about velocity. Did you get all the way through the diagrammatica? Because I had written that as well yesterday. Did you get all the way to here?
I got all the way down to the where you started, the right there. You left off. You had
Yeah.
stopped that one sentence, and when you disconnected from this water, X, fire, metal, so you were starting to do those diagrams there that are on screen now. That's about as far as I got.
Oh, okay. So what was it that got you? Because you came back, and you're like, no, I'm pretty sure we got to talk about velocity.
Well, it's not necessarily, man, it's hard to put into really words. I could see it in my head.
Well, because it did come up.
Yeah. So the
But
Gaussian
here-
curve is in a Gaussian sense, we're talking about things being maintained, I think, in kind of a normal distribution, statistically speaking. Like you got your, I guess, am I right there? Am I saying that correctly?
Well, we're
So you
going to
have
pull up
this-
Gaussian curvature. Just go ahead.
Yeah, like a continuous, I'm actually reading from, here we go. So it's a type of continuous probability distribution for a real valued random variable, right? That's kind of what in statistics, that's what that is. But if we're trying to express functionally velocity, we're keeping it open or infinite, but yet at the same time, you've got all of these variables that come into play, such as pressure, temperature, as Robert pointed out in the chat yesterday. You've got a lot of, for the medium with which that velocity is taking place, but then we've always functionally tied it to the observation point and then linearly through, related it in a bell curve type shape based upon all of the conditions at the time of observation. So at the time of observation, you begin your linear path, the bell curve type concept of that velocity exists, but we then lose track of all of the different nodes of potentiality that exist within that just by simply sticking a lambda or sticking some sort of infinite symbol. That was where my brain was yesterday when I brought this up. I think we need to unhinge velocity from the expressions of functionality simply for the sake that we don't understand the chirality that's existing and all of the forces that are taking place upon whether or not it's a photon or matter, an electron, whatever the state. It's energetic and it's all the way down to its basic form. We just are looking at it like, it's turtles all the way down or whatever. We're looking at different manifestations, for lack of better terms, but manifestations of the physical in the spiritual, the connectivity there. But as you relate all energetically across the board through, what we're trying to describe here in an expression or a function, we've always tied velocity into that as a parallel with the other different variables. It's always maintained some form of a statistical parallel. And my thought was removing velocity from that simply because you have to look at it as its own independent variable based upon the matrix with which it's existing, such as the Dougherty set. And the probability to swap different nodes throughout its linear path is what was confusing me, and why we've always functionally just assigned random and arbitrary points of infinite or whatever in the process of trying to express fully what's happening in our material world. Did any of that make sense? Because I just
I'm gonna give Robert a crack at it because my mind is slightly going in a different direction.
Yeah, I thought the way I'd attack the velocity problem is actually look at its definition. One thing I will point out that length contraction as such can actually be affected by charge cancellation. So if an object, if two objects or two charges can cancel, then those charges will shrink because the space between them, the space between them will reduce. So you get effectively a length contraction mechanism. The main issue that I have with this is when we look in the historical record, we got Galileo and Newton coming up with explanations as to why motion was occurring, but that what they were observing was the gross effects of whatever was causing it. And it's not until we understand that what exists in terms of how the things we're observing, once we understand that there are atoms and that atoms have componentry in the form of electrons and protons and photons to create neutron mechanisms, that's at the point you understand that that's what the material universe consists of, which is charged particles, and that some of those particles can be very slightly charged as to very strongly charged. So there's a lot of mythology, I suppose. When we talk about it's neutral, it's not actually neutral. It's slightly negative or slightly north, or it's got a preference to a particular charge. But that preference is so tiny compared to the environment, it's very hard to detect. And when I was developing this theory with Roy, I came up with a method of how do we explain the electron and the proton, because we know it's a construct. And the reason why we know it's a construct is we smack it into things and we get particles, it fractures. But it doesn't stay fractured for very long. It joins back together and forms these larger scale product, which is the electron and the proton. So these things all go back into a photon structure. So that means that because you have a monopole electrical particle with a dipole magnetic structure in it, that arrangement immediately tells me it has to be a construct, because we know the electrical charge is a dipole structure, and we know the magnetic charge is a dipole structure. So how can we then go and say that because the electron is monopole, it's an actual particle? You know, that's the one thing in quantum physics they haven't said is a construct.
Can I just say, I checked out the Distinti video the other day, and from what I could gather, because it was only part of what he's releasing. He's doing most of it. He wants paying for most of the information at the moment. But from what I could see, it was saying that basically matter requires a lot of energy to keep, well, to hold together, and that this energy is provided by the ether. And as far now, one thing I did hear him say was that these ether particles can travel, so they go to areas of matter. This is what causes gravity. And he says these ether particles can travel at 5,000 times the speed of light. And so, yeah, and maybe this is providing the energy which spins around, and the actual spin produces the chirality, the polar effect. That's
everything. So then, okay, go ahead. Sorry, Rob.
With matter, you have, when we talk about the lowest energy state, what we really mean is what is the lowest state of constructional material in the construction that achieves the most stable state that construction can achieve in the environment.
Yeah.
So all matter, when we're talking about matter that is, you know, of larger scale than the actual base seed product that's building everything, that will absorb or express that material. And you will not be able to detect that activity using large-scale detectors. You need to be able to detect the seed particles. If you can't detect them, you don't see the exchange. So it's, you know, it's the interferometry experiment of Millikan's, where in modern times they've gone vertically. You've seen the evidence of that that behavior in the experiments. There's two of them that show that the Aether exists and it produces a drag and all the rest of it, or matter absorbs it, which is, you know, while Thornhill talks about it as being neutrinos, but neutrinos, from the hearsay response I've got about from the research group that don't want to talk about their lives, saying that yes, it is a photon, and it's composed like all photons of subsequent of smaller structure, but for the Aether is the bare base building block, and any interim stable particle that environment can support. So there's a process of building, and I was wondering whether the number of the seed probe constructs to go into the next larger scale construct that occurs, whether that was an Avogadro's number of particles to achieve it. And in the speculation I have, you go from the seed particle to what I call a chargino, which is a complex structure consisting of three parts, and that chargino mechanism joins with another identical construct to create half a photon, and then you get the inverted charge to create the rest of the photon structure. So the photon, from my modeling, is two negative charge structures and two positive charge structures that are in a complex arrangement. And you need that arrangement so that you get for the photon to become stable, to allow it to transmit itself from location to location in a stable way. And the structure of the photon mimics what we see in an electrical wire conduit, where you've got the electrons traveling counter-directionally, counter-spin around the surface of the conductor, forwards and backwards along the conductor. But inside the conductor, you've got these four counter-rotating magnetic fields that also, rotate in two directions inside the structure. So you end up with a construct for photons and for electrical transmission behavior that is agreement. And if we've got if this structure is, four rotating magnetic fields and four rotating electrical fields, then you can invite the photons to condense into a much more connected and tighter beam structure and produce the laser, which is, what we observe. But if you take the model of the photon where they have in Wikipedia, where the fields are oscillating and, electric fields are creating the magnetic and all the rest of it, that model will not produce the laser beam. And the other thing is that there are two sets of equations that indicate that the photon itself is a LRC circuit. So it's a capacitance, an inductor structure, a capacitance structure, and a resistance structure all together that are oscillating. But there's two sets of oscillation. One oscillation determines the frequency, and the other oscillation determines the speed at which that particle will move through the Aether or through the material universe. And if I can reduce my charge extent, there's an interaction boundary where if the generators of two fields are within inside each other's interaction boundary, they will glue together or stick or become frictional and slow down. But if that field reduces so that the environment, the interaction field doesn't get to the generator of the other stuff around it, it will slide faster. So while Distinti is talking about, a speed of 5,000 or whatever, 5,000 times the speed of light, that's not fast enough. The measures made of the gravitational field speed indicates 10 to the 11, or is it 10 to the 9 times the speed of light. And for other constructional records, if we're talking about the Aether particle itself, it can travel instantly between any location, any two locations in the universe. It's almost like it's not there. So while the charge inner looks like it doesn't interact much, when it comes to the Aether field, the interaction's even weaker. And one of the consequences of that is, if the field extends to a huge distance, and when we're talking, billions of light years, the strength of the field in terms of interacting with matter is it's a volumetric impact, so that the interaction is like the third root of that field strength with an inverse. So it's nigh on impossible to detect, and you need some very good detectors to get there. So it's if my speculations hold up and they are true, and the hearsay evidence I get back is correct, that they're not bullshitting me. Our understanding of how matter constructs occur is going to change dramatically. But whatever the wire behavior of electrical transmission, of the expression of energy in a conductor, in a mechanism we call electrics, that behavior has to exist in all constructs regardless of scale, because it's a fractal build. And for the behavior to occur, that means the basis particle has to have characteristic behavior that's inherited by whatever construction rules you apply to it. And the consequence of my criticism of Millikan's experiment is that if the electric charge and for the electron and the electric charge value for the proton are different, then all our assumptions about how material constructs come together in mainstream science and research just turns to dust. And it becomes very important under those circumstances. It's all our mathematics, our model, everything is just skewed. It's almost good enough, but
it's not there.
Precise enough. Yeah, it's not precise enough. And some of this almost there is producing these problems in building nanocircuitry, because the effect becomes that much larger. Because there's not many things involved, these differences are significant, and the behavior of these materials isn't what's expected. So I was talking about, the way we work out distance itself is a consequence of electric fields and the way the field structure and how far it can express itself before it's no longer influencing the environment. So in the constructional model that I produced in the speculation, the fact that we've got three directions in the field structure, and that field structure is in rotation in 5 axes, you get curved space. You don't need Einstein to do that. You get curved space instantly, because the spatial structure is warped. And the really interesting thing was, when I first started this back in 2014, Roy was giving me a whole series of papers, and he said, one of the things I noticed immediately was that we had 3-dimensional analysis, and I had 5-dimensional analysis, and 7-dimensional analysis, and 11-dimensional analysis. And one of his comments he made to me is, just off the cuff, is that if I have 5 dimensions, then I can hook up electromagnetics and gravitics. If I have 7-dimensional mathematics, I can hook up a few other things, which meant one of the it changes how behavior expresses itself. So I'm convinced that the matter structure that's the seed particle exists simultaneously in a whole series of nested space, and that's driven by a prime dimensional number. So when we talk about a flow, part of it exists in the three-dimensional space, or the 2 or 1-dimensional space. But it also, there's that the flow then migrates into the 5 and 7 and 13 and 11 and all the other dimensional spaces. It's not confined to just the 3-dimensional space environment, which I don't know how we would
I like that
develop
way of thinking somehow,
mathematics
though.
for that.
Yeah, I could see that.
I think there is something along those lines, and another thing is when you mentioned that time at, let's say, distance operates on a scale let's say it's not a linear scale, it's more hyperbolic. Is that a better way of putting it? So that the further away something is, basically
You reach a tipping
the
point.
longer the ruler you use to measure the distance. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, the ruler you're using becomes unreliable at different distances. So if I'm using a 12-inch ruler, that's no good when I'm trying to measure something that's 10 feet long, and it's no good if I'm trying to measure something that's less than half the division of the ruler. But the thing is, the ruler itself is subject to contraction and expansion just because of the environment. So it becomes unreliable. So yeah. So unless you've got some way of accounting for this charge cancellation mechanism that causes elastic or inelastic compression and expansion, unless you've got some way of actually determining how far the field extends before it becomes irrelevant to the mathematics or to the interactions you're trying to observe, unless you've got some way of determining that field size and reliably being able to rescale it, we're not going to be able to measure things effectively at all.
Well, hypothetically, doesn't harmonics do that for us already in the terms of what creates cymatic patterns in certain shapes and forms, but then the ones that don't? That would be at least a baseline to be able to establish a certain pattern to determine how many rulers we need and what size the ruler needs to be.
True, but the harmonics itself causes expansion and contraction. So we need a model.
Son of a bitch.
We need a model. We need a model. This is one of the reasons why I was saying, all I can do at the moment, because I don't have the mathematics that's required or the imagination to figure out how to work it out, is describe the behavior that has to be present, and hopefully someone who has the skills in the mathematics is going to be able to come up with a better interaction. It's one of the, if I understood how to analyze the magnetic field structure, magnetic interactions, we might be able to extend Weber's model to include it. But Michael Claridge, in his last one of his interviews, quite recent interviews, was saying, he was asked the question of, how do you measure the magnetic field? And he went, oh, that one's a real problem. There's all sorts of issues with it. And I think the issues that are the problem is the fact that the magnetic field we want to measure is a rotating toroidal structure that's turning itself inside out.
Yeah, it's a perpetual motion type scenario.
And it looks like vibration, but it's it's a bit more than vibration.
Yeah, I was going to say that a minute ago. We keep referring to vibration as something going side to side, when in reality, it's the dipolar action of rotating, past one another, creating what we refer to on a cosmological scale as wobble, the axial wobble. But that's, I guess, the best way to visualize it is you have those counter-rotating. And whenever they get imbalanced by influence from the outside or trying to go to the self-alignment or trying to match up with other similar pairs, though they're not successful, that creates what I think is that vibration. So when an energy is provided to a point to create matter or transmute matter into this realm, the vibration, what we're calling vibration, is really just the spinning of the dipoles. But then they get out of whack, because the attraction to go to self-alignment, or the attraction to, go towards other states similar to itself, so to speak, energetically, creates what we call wobble cosmologically, but it's really vibration is what we're referring to it in a smaller scale.
Yeah.
At least I think so.
When I'm talking about getting a simplex and turning it fully inside out, so if we take a simplex, you work out where the centroids of that structure are. But there's a virtual centroid structure that's outside of it. And what you're doing is you're swapping the virtual with the real, and you turn it inside out. And you get a toroidal ovoid, which is almost spherical. But in both structures, you've still got a void through the center of the structure. That's where the centroid is. But in the process of turning itself from a simplex into an ovoid back into a simplex, that process is going to look like an oscillation, and it will appear as a vibration if we're not careful about what we're observing. But the secondary thing is, if I get two charges that are exactly equal in terms of construction, while I can cause these things to rotate in the opposite directions and cancel the fields, there will always be a distance between the two constructs. So I can't exactly cut away the charge. I can't neutralize it completely. So there will always be a preferential difference between it, depending on which side of the structure I put my detector. And when we're talking anti-charge structures, unless they're identical in construction, they won't decay. So if I get an electron, a light electron, and its anti-electron of the same construction, and put them together, that structure will decompose into photons. However, if I get a lighter electron and a heavier electron, a heavier anti-electron, and put them together, they won't decompose, and further, they won't cancel each other out. But you need to put in more matter constructs in there to balance out all these field variations. So for a construct, you have something that's promoting concordance and something that's promoting discordance in terms of the stability of the structure. And if I shove too much stuff in there, the discordance factor goes up. But if I take too much out, it causes another problem. So there's this sweet point where the balance is almost right. When we're talking about Alton Harp's intrinsic redshift, my take on it is that the photon has a redshift because it can't express etheric construct into the environment. So there's not enough there to make it, non-redshift. Whereas blue shift is overloaded with etheric construct, easily expressed. So, it's how much building material is in the structure that drives whether you see a red shift or a blue shift or a no shift. So and the other thing I've had with this construct, the seed particle. How do we describe something that is a material structure where it's stretched? The actual structure itself is, I think of it as a string that has no componentry in it, that goes from the infinite past to the infinite future, and it somehow is generating an oscillation. That string is, wound into a helical path that travels in a simplex node network. And the thing is, it has different sets of vibrations. And there are 3 that are really strong, and then there are another 3 that are not so strong, and so on, up the prime number set. That if I can convince the structure to resonate, it won't be looking like it's a strong electric and strong magnetic structure. It might look like a weak electric structure and a strong magnetic structure and maybe a strong temperature structure. The thing changes its behavior. The reason why I've come to that conclusion is if I go and say every other type of charge is actually an individual construct. When I try to put these things together, there's too much. It becomes too complex. It doesn't work. So it has to be a charge. What we're calling charge has to be something that's being produced by the resonance of the structure itself to begin with. And that would then imply that charge itself expresses itself like magnetics or like temperature or like electricity or like time. So
where would pressure come into play with all this, Robert? Do you think?
Pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure is the consequence of these interactions between separate constructs. So if I have a lot of constructs and it's behaving like a gas, I'll get pressure behavior. Or if it becomes a liquid, I get another set of behavior. But it's a measure of how much stuff is in a given volume. And the given volume can be three-dimensional structure or five-dimensional structure or seven-dimensional structure. And in those circumstances, what might be a high-pressure environment in a higher dimensional structure might not show much in a low-dimensional structure. It's lower dimension shadow.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. It's complicated. You've got to really think this stuff through and say, how do we express the behavior that we need to have to explain the stuff that's occurring? And I've been struggling with it for nearly a decade now, and probably not much better now in terms of describing what really has to occur than I was 7 years ago. I know what I did 7 years ago was wrong. I know the model I was coming up for construction in the first version of the nature of things doesn't work, and I had a number of revisions in the charge chapter. It's revision 5 or something like that, and I know number 5 is incorrect, and all the ones before it. So I just don't really know how to describe this stuff. And of course, you're going to get people that say, "Oh, where's your mathematics?" And I say, "Well, I don't understand the behavior. How the hell do you expect me to come up with mathematics to describe the behavior that I don't understand?"
Yeah.
You've got to have a good model before you've got any chance with the mathematics. But that stated, the mathematics we've got for electromagnetics is not too bad. It's
right.
Yes,
it's allowing for a lot of room to play, so to speak. Yeah, it's giving you a lot of room to play with.
Yeah, but what you don't have in that is complete coverage. In other words, the existing mathematics that describe electromagnetic behavior does. So when we're talking about velocity, we have equations that explain, and I've got a lump of material and it moves from A to B, but the velocity equations don't explain why this thing appears to speed up and slow down. One of the things that told me about the photon is you need to think about it as a lozenge, the Dougherty set lozenge, where you get a large ellipsoid that then turns into a small sphere and a large ellipsoid, and it's like an oscillation mechanism down there. But what happens is the speed of light speeds up and then it slows down because it's going in reverse. It speeds up and slows down in terms of its actual translocation. But in terms of the structure where you've got two negative and two positive parts that are in counter rotation to each other, half the photon is rotating at faster than the speed of light, whereas the other half is slower than the speed of light. And these two things cancel out, producing light speed. So, it's really weird. And I don't know how to describe how that works, but I'm sure that in Buddy's Dougherty set analysis, will have
it just came up on screen.
Yeah, Buddy's Dougherty set explanation will have mathematical structure in his Dougherty set images that explain why it is that half the light photon can travel at faster than the speed of light and the other half is slower than the speed of light. And these two things counterbalance each other. It'll be in the maths.
Right, but we just talked about pressure being inside of a set container, so to speak, right?
Yeah, for
Right.
pressure,
So,
I need a volume of material for it to even start, because pressure is described as density over volume. And density requires stuff, and volume requires a boundary condition.
right.
Which
So
is one
if
of the
we,
reasons why the gas model for the sun is wrong.
yes, very, very well. But so then, technically speaking, what's providing pressure for the everyday average Joe just walking outside? What's providing that container for the pressure? And for me, it's like I see through the, there's a great demonstration with the Sapphire project and the model that they were able to create inside of a vacuum there. They're able to show the layering effect that occurs when you have, certain materials and gases inside of a vacuum, and then you apply a certain set amount of energy. They've at least established a baseline for the transmutation of elements inside of a vacuum, or at least inside of a gas, filled environment.
Correct.
So
we look at that chamber. It's evacuated. They put in controlled gas structures that then becomes a plasma. But notice where the plasma is. The plasma is close to where the charge fields drive it to be confined. So when plasma is confined in that manner, it produces pressure that's higher than the emptier, the less speciated volume around the plasma. In other words, you can see the
in
plasma.
Actuality, I think what they were finding. Go ahead.
Yeah, but between the plasma and the vessel boundary, there wasn't much ionized material. It was all confined down into that plasma structure. And because you've got a plasma, one of the things I made an observation about and was confirmed as hearsay is that a resonating magnetic electrical mechanism will produce nuclear synthesis processes. In other words, elements will transform and elements will combine to produce. And the model I came up with is, if I want to synthesize material, I need to, let's say I want to produce silicon. I need two oxygens of atom, two oxygen atoms, and two hydrogen atoms. And they combine in a resonating mechanism, and I get a silicon atom out of it. And this sort of stuff occurs throughout the periodic table. And the reason why I came to that is there was a series of detectors that were slowly failing. And when they went and examined these detectors, they found that there was transmutation occurring. And, the suite of elements that were there when the detector was built had changed to a different set, and all the light elements had disappeared. And I asked the question, for these detectors, is there a resonating magnetic field occurring in the environment that detector is? Because what you've got is an electrical circuit mechanism and a pulsating magnetic field. And if you've got those two things happening, you will get nuclear fusion. You will get nuclear transmutation.
Right. So
and you will get chemical reactions.
Right. So as far as your so as far as your point to the ionization being not found outside of the vacuum or the chamber, I don't know what material was used in order to create the actual chamber itself, but as far as the transmutation of elements, they were finding that the layers, the gases inside of the chamber were aligning themselves in certain specific layers, correct? And that the elements wouldn't be transmuted or wouldn't be formed until the collapse of that plasma field. So it wasn't necessarily the plasma field that was generating these elements in the sense, it was the collapsing of the field that would then cause the self-alignment process to occur into these different elements based upon the randomness of whatever was occurring inside of the chamber.
I'll explain the container they were using in Sapphire was a metal 6 foot across metal cylinder, basically, which was highly polished and all the rest of it. Then they introduced, hydrogen and helium and all these different gases in different ratios, applied the electric potential between these things, and you get a plasma to develop. And because the environment begins to pulse, when these tough nodes appear, they flip around, they move, they pulse, and the plasma then undergoes periodic pinching, which we probably weren't observing. When the pinching occurs, this is when you get the twisted magnetic filament. The charge itself twists and knots, and when it knots, it becomes very difficult for things to flow around, and the knot will melt. And when the knot melts, that's when you get an energy release, and these transmutation mechanisms kick in. So they would have been happening in that environment, but they're happening so fast and so small that we don't see them. What we see is plasma tufts that are undergoing these transformations.
Correct, but those are being, as long as the energy is being applied to the initial anode that created this process to begin with, where it, once that anode collapses, those tufts then also collapse, but they also are in the process of self-aligning to more like structures of matter within that environment or within that limitations or boundaries.
The way I'd say it is that the structure collects Aether particles and then over-energizes and then releases them. And in the process
in the form
of
matter,
you get transformation mechanisms kick in. So it's the relaxation mechanism that's causing this transformation. However, there's a contraction mechanism that's amping things up. So it's an oscillation effect, effectively.
Yes, I agree with that.
So it's not that we were dumb in observing it. The guys that were doing the Sapphire experiment were using the best technology they had available to them. But that really wasn't good enough to see what was actually going on. We're just seeing a larger scale effect. We can't see the insides of it. So I don't know. I've sent Wal Thornhill my papers about how this stuff goes together and said, probably not completely right. But some of his more recent comments that I've seen, I'm beginning to wonder whether he's actually read it and then tried to think, is there a way to shoot me down? And I've done this to, not just Wal Thornhill. I've sent these ideas off to other people and say, if you can find a way to show that I've got it wrong, tell me, because I'm spending time and effort on this, and I'd like to have a correct picture. But all I've received in terms of response is total silence.
Well, I think because if I had to speak from any angle on this, I think it's the reality of what we're faced with is that if for some reason this were to all go mainstream, that's why the banding, the shadow banning is taking place, and people aren't responding necessarily as in a proper way that you think normally would. I think because what we've just discussed here expresses so much of the lies and crap that we've all been fed, and it's not from misunderstanding things.
Don't go negative today. It's beautiful flux up.
All right. But I think that's one of the main reasons is that a lot of this stuff has been because of the lies that it exposes scientifically.
Well, the problem that my theory does is it does away with a lot of gumph instantly. You don't have quarks. You don't have the quantum model in terms of particles just disappears. You end up with the SAM model because it's a geometry as well as field arrangement. So the standard model for the atom goes away, and you're now in SAM territory, which I think is correct. It's more correct than the standard model, that's for sure. So there's a whole series of impacts that occur that, people's wages are dependent upon that not happening. So that'll be the reason why, there's a resistance to it. But these are really radical ideas. And one of the things that, I don't know whether this group's aware of it, is that if I have plasmas of different atoms and plasmas that are of different temperatures for the same isotope, these things won't mix. they'll remain isolate from each other. And what occurs in a plasma pinch is they're forced to mix. And then interesting things happen. So, but
are you saying that they're forced to mix, or is it that they're, because you're saying it's based on thermodynamics, but is it not just that the speed with which they are made to match each other's temperature causing this to take place? The velocity of it.
I'm claiming the temperature. I'm claiming that hot and cold is a charge. Okay, that's one of straight away. Now, if I got just straight up normal construct, light electron and light proton hydrogen, and that's the isotope I have, not the other varieties of electron and proton. So it's, I have a hydrogen gas that's just the light ones, and I ionize it at different temperatures. Those groups of hydrogen will not mix until their temperature balance
equalizes. Yeah.
Right, then they'll mix. Now, if we're talking about plasmas involving different elements, the complex interaction to get them to mix becomes much harder to achieve. And although a plasma is not a chemical compound, the atoms in that
they behave that way.
Multi-species plasma will arrange themselves in a grid network that looks like a chemical compound.
Well, I think heteropolymer, you guys familiar with heteropolymers as far as chemistry is concerned? The monomer.
Oh.
So you have the monomer, right? Which is just basically a small molecule which can be covalently bonded to other monomers to form a polymer. But now you have this other thing called heteropolymer, which is a polymer derived from two or more different but often similar types of monomers, right? But then you go to the papers that have been published on heteropolymers and you find that they absolutely violate Avogadro's number. In the sense of when it comes to just something as simple as macromolecules and kind of breaking it all down to that level. So it's just, we've already shown it inside of the terms of, in biological terms, what we have just discussed has been already demonstrated and labeled utilizing different, semantic labeling. But they're witnessing these things already inside of the biological sense of things, and not really, I think, realizing just as much.
They're not realizing that the driver in all these chemical reactions is electromagnetics.
Exactly.
The reason why they're behaving them is because of the dynamics of electromagnetics, and it's got nothing to do with their other, spurious explanations. But I was going to say something that I've lost my train of thought in terms of these plasma interaction mechanisms.
Behaving in a chemical way?
Yeah, behaving in a chemical way. With a plasma, if I get a compound, like let's say I get carbon or I get lead or something else, sulfur or something else, when that plasma neutralizes, becomes electrically neutral, it develops a solid lattice network structure. And the reason why I can say that is if we get carbon and we have it ionized and we let it, discharge in a slow way, it builds. The first structure it builds is diamond structure. It doesn't build graphene or buckyballs. It goes straight to diamond. And if I have water in a cloud, which is ionized, that's the reason why it's suspended in the water molecule. Still is a molecule, but it's ionized water. It's not just straight neutral water. And when that decharges and becomes, turns into rain, it'll turn into rain droplets. It'll turn into ice balls, or at the right temperature, it'll turn into snowflakes. So as that structure neutralizes, it produces a solid structure that's determined by the environment and the way it discharges. So I was saying to Roy, I said, if I got carbon dioxide and did this sort of thing, and it was going to neutralize, the first thing I get is dry ice.
So then my question goes to what is creating the plasma in the first place matters, excuse the pun, but doesn't the particular anode that is generating the plasma field, doesn't that make all of the difference in the scenario that we're just discussed?
Well, the plasma is being generated by a massive electrical potential.
Right, but that potential has to have some form of a substance, doesn't, or to be generated in the first place, correct? It can't be just the etheric field.
If you watch the J.J. Thomson Thunder machine, what I get is a bar of copper with 2 rings on each end. I have 2 of those. I arrange them in a cross, and I make sure they're fully insulated from each other. And then what I get is a diabatic needle nozzle of water that I then drop through so I've arranged these cups so that one's on top of the other, okay? So that if I go first through the first ring, I go into the second cup, and the same on the other side. And I have 2 nozzles that drip water or squirt water down between inside the rings of the copper rings. And just that motion alone will induce in the copper an electrical charge that can get to 40,000 volts DC instantly. So just the matter itself in motion in that environment, if there's a charged potential electric field there, elements of that environment will ionize, and you'll get a plasma structure. Just very easy. So
right, but that plasma structure would have been based upon the material of copper in that instance, and the resonating field between the 2 coils, correct?
Not really, because what's occurring is the water is.
Well, what if I did silver? What if I use silver coils instead of copper?
Well,
would the effect be different?
You get a different result.
Well,
but
then how can you not say that they're not related?
The water itself is not touching the copper.
It's the field between the coils that's
it's
what's
the water molecule. It's the
right.
water molecule passing by.
Okay, so then I drop, let's say, vinegar through instead of water. Is that going to change?
Well, it'll change how fast it would charge up.
Right. So
but
it has to have something.
The other weird thing that occurs is that when the electric field develops in the copper, it develops to a large capacitance. The water doesn't just continue to fall to the base, it actually goes around the toroidal donut, around the structure. And it starts to just, zip around in a toroid through the copper. So you get this toroidal structure of water.
And that happens based upon the vacuum that is our current environment. That's not inside the chamber.
This is in normal air.
Right.
This is in normal air. Normal air pressure, nothing fancy.
Nothing fancy.
All you've done is, is just drop water through a thin stream of water through 2 copper rings, and it produces this bizarre result.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the analysis that the explanation of why this thunder machine that Thomson developed to explain thunderstorms, which is why it's called the thunder machine, we don't have an explanation of why should water falling through a ring of copper produce an electrical capacitance charging mechanism. Why should that occur? What's really going on?
A minute ago we discussed, and I'm going to take a quick shot at it. A minute ago we discussed how matter being transmuted into the realm is all dependent upon X, Y, and Z, and all these factors coming into play. And then vibration is really just the the chiralic nature of 2 charges, right? So if you have a ring of copper, all of which are very much so attracted to the other in an equal distance from across the diameter of these rings, then the water goes through the center of that, and it disrupts that attraction that the copper matter has to the other copper matter on the other side. That disrupts that. That is what then that disruption is what causes that electrical charge to take place.
Well,
hypothetically,
I don't know. It's generating. It's generating.
Took a shot.
Hey, but pause 1 second. Buddy, are you there?
Generates the chart.
Pause 1 second. Buddy, are you there?
He's there, but he's muted.
Yeah.
Would you prefer your art be shown from something called Mathematical Art Galleries, bridgemathartort, or from etherforce.energy?
there's not that many on bridges.org. There's probably more on ether.energy.
Well, I'm using Google Images here.
Yeah.
This
yeah,
Ether Force Energy one is pretty good.
Yeah, the Ether Force. Yeah. I'd use that one.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, continue, guys.
Getting back to our thunder machine, we can describe the process we observe. What we can't do is give an explanation as to why that should occur. And why does that process occur as opposed to some other process? And when we're talking science, that second step is what's missing in a lot of our analysis, in experimentation and all the rest of it. It's the reason why we develop these, that can't happen. That's impossible. You know, it's a big surprise that if I smack a charged object in, I'm told that the dart impact to the asteroid that NASA did just recently was an explosive impact. And it was a nuclear weapon or nuclear device of some kind. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not because I haven't actually read the details of the experiment. But the impact alone would have changed the electrical capacitance of the structure. And I've dug a hole in it, so I'm going to get electrical machining that's going to produce, surprise, surprise, a 30-great big cometary tail out of it that looks exactly like it's a comet. But we know it was an asteroid before we smacked into it, and we know it was a lump of rock. So, you know, what does that do? What does that do to the minds of people in astrophysics that are actually trying to explain why we observe what we do instead of just assuming the gravity solution is what's making things work? There are guys in astrophysics that are trying to work out the real mechanisms that are there, but because of all the stuff that is constraining them, it's not going to see the light of day unless there's some massive fundamental shift in physics itself. And
the entire paradigm has to be shifted.
I suggested that, you know, physics 101 should be relabeled to electromagnetics 101 and just get rid of physics as a concept completely. Because everything that occurs in our universe requires charged electrical and charged magnetic matter, at least. You know, all the behavior can be explained with an electrodynamic
relationship.
Approach.
Yeah.
And even using the Maxwell equations, you end up with the ability to describe gravitic and mass type interactions just from electrodynamics. And the reason why I know that is Common Sense Org has had a whole series of papers that I can provide people with because if you pay for it, you can't get to the link. But I grabbed them when they were free. So in there, the guys have developed a series of papers that explain from an electromagnetic point of view how I produce matter behavior. And what I really wish is I still knew where it was. I'm sure I've still got it on the computer somewhere, I just can't find it. Is I had a matter paradigm that produced the electromagnetics. And this is the reason why I say there's an underlying structure that supports a gravitic style approach or an electromagnetic style approach. But it doesn't support a quantum or an Einstein approach. That doesn't work. That's not supported. And they know it's not supported because their models keep breaking. You know, there's gotchas all over it.
Well, I find it really funny because I have no idea if it totally breaks down, but I can tell you this: while you've been talking, I've come up with diagrammatic explanations, whimsical explanations for why we get the results we do in physics. And it took a matter of getting down to where we follow the big G. So in the Bhagavad Dharma, you go clockwise, but if you go counterclockwise, trying to move towards the ether, from the counter space towards the ether, then you end up producing all this science that is currently, the impossible stuff that doesn't want to unify. I think that's interesting. Of course, I put in here that general relativity has yet to be corrected.
Well, we know
Right,
it's
it's
wrong,
not.
don't we?
Well, it's
Yeah.
got to be wrong because it's based on the weakest calculation of, that this is a remnant of a lot of other things going on. But
Stephen is
but
not.
still, it's interesting because the law of
He's not the only guy.
relativity is in between. The question is, how badly is the law of relativity misunderstood? It's probably completely inversed.
I think Andrea Scissor's approach was to call it relational mechanics and just ignore relativity. So he would take the view that it's a relational mechanical interaction mechanism that's going on, and we need to get that understanding correct. And relativity is expressed by Einstein and his pinched ideas from others.
Right.
Disagrees.
I mean, that's the thing is it's not going the way it should, but we know that some of the results do work. So you go, "Well, what the heck?" It's goes back to my argument, and it's like lasers would like to have a talk with you. If it was completely wrong, we wouldn't get lasers. But you are right about this, which is why the lasers work. They don't really know. They have a model, and they can do really complex in engineering. Semiconductors, the whole computers, everything we're using comes from their current model of light because they use photons for etching, creating masks for creating the semiconductors, for the quantum tunneling. But the mere fact that in the model, and I knew this right in college when they taught me, even when I was mainstream, if I'm creating a barrier of infinite permittivity and I'm going to quantum tunnel outside of that, then one of the two things is wrong. Either my infinitely permittive barrier is not infinitely permittive, or my understanding of the quanta is wrong. You can't have it both ways. But mathematically, that's exactly what they use for semiconductors.
I just treated the conduction of electrical transmission down a twisted pair wire. I'm saying that behavior we see in a twisted pair where the wires, come together and want to lock up. You've got to actually stick an insulator to stop short circuits occurring. That model of what the physical things we've done to produce Cat6 cabling and all the rest of it, which is all dependent on what the rate of twisting in the wire is determined over the linear distance. That behavior that's required for electrical conduction has to be the case, has to be in effect for the photon interaction to produce the laser beam. There's got to be a mechanism to cause the light to synchronize and then cohere to each other. It's like it's glued, the photons are gluing together. And the only mechanism that I could come up with on the basis that everything is an electromagnetic interaction mechanism is that the photon, in terms of its field structure and generation oscillation mechanisms, has to behave in the exact same way as conduction of electrical energy down a conductor. But the only difference between those two environments is there is a conductor for the electrical energy transmission, but there's no conductor for the photon, for the laser beam. But there is a conduit for the laser beam. The conductor is acting as a conduit mechanism to confine the flow. And where we're talking about a laser beam, we set up a field structure that produces a conduit through which the photons travel. And that mechanism can compress, it can expand, it can do any number of those sorts of things. So you end up with helical motion, compression, contraction, and all the rest of it, which is where I'm seeing Buddy's Dougherty set modeling stuff becomes extremely important to explaining the behavior of both environments.
Mm-hmm.
I saw.
It's just I don't have the skill.
I saw something on a YouTube show yesterday about light and the nature of light, and apparently spectral lines, that everything gives off light. So there's a specific spectral line that hydrogen gives, or spectral array that hydrogen gives off. Every atom gives off has a certain spectrum, right? But these spectral lines always come in pairs, and they're so close to each other that you can't even tell. You can barely even tell that they're separated. And that's the double layering that we're seeing, the direct effect of the double layering that we're seeing that's in the Dougherty set, and the double layering that is just the collimation that we're seeing. Oh, here, I'll share this image. This is a great image I'm about to write up here.
Just go ahead and you can grab the share screen because I'll grab it back if I need it.
Give a sec while Buddy talks, because I need to go walk a little bit of a distance. I'll be back shortly.
All right. This is what we're seeing. Oh, here, I'll go to share screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Share screen, start now. This right here is similar to what, I guess exactly what I was trying to say. The spectral lines that we see from hydrogen or any atom or any spectral array that we get from light is what we would see on the right-hand side. That would be the spectral lines. Those lines come from the torus. The torus is obviously on the left. Nested toruses. And the nested toruses in propagation, or showing how they're moving and in linear propagation or outward, is the center. All three of them are the truth. And we're calling it so many different things because we're observing it from different angles. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Nobody's got a follow up on that?
Well, I had a question. What was the center one again? I'm sorry, I had my dog here. I got to get under control. What was the center one there, buddy, that you were describing? The Vesica Pisces there symbol?
That's just showing that the donuts are stacked on top of each other.
So yeah, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase it quick. What angle is that observation taking place there in the center one?
The center one would be sort of like a slight side view.
Right.
The aerial view would be the left one, and a complete side view.
So hypothetically speaking, I'm just a random thought here, but 42 degrees is what we are able to visualize a rainbow at, supposedly, correct? Like as far as an angle is concerned. So if you're looking at photons emanating from a specific location, the source of those photons and then your position relative to that particular photon would make all the difference in the world, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Look at there. So is the Earth flat or round, folks? Or all of the above, right? It just depends on where you're standing on the planet.
I wouldn't go that far.
Or is it
being comical?
The Earth is an ovoid.
An oblate sphere.
It's an ovoid. It's not a sphere.
It just depends on where you're standing, what angle you're looking at it from, I suppose.
Yeah, an oblate sphere is an ovoid.
Yeah, but it's oh yeah, you're right.
So then, hypothetically speaking, from the center viewpoint, the one that you showed there, where you're looking at it from a Vesica Pisces type standpoint, wouldn't the light from the other side coming through, right? So 1 + 1 = 3 in this reference here, because you're able to not only see the photons coming from the one side of the toroidal shape, but you're also able to see the other photons from the other side, or are they only emanating from one direction outward?
Well, they
You
can
know what I
come
mean?
from
Like
any.
spiral out, center out.
They could
It's inside out, outside in, inside out, outside in, and that's the only way that the universe moves. Outside in, inside out. So the outside of the rim of the torus, of the previous torus, becomes the inside of the rim of the next moment or motion, then becomes the outside, inside out, outside in, inside out. It's subsequent layers. That's what makes us.
Wait, I mean, are you understanding my question though? Like, so go back and look at that center diagram, and I know I'm just taking a very, very caveman type approach to this, but if you're viewing from that angle, wouldn't you not get, kind of the other side of that
Can I make
emission as well?
Make an observation?
Yeah, you get both sides.
Water drop that you're seeing the rainbow as a result, that's expressing the rainbow mechanism, the lensing effect. But the water droplet itself is an ovoid, and depending on the angles of internal reflection, if you can get the light to come in a direction that we will then see it and observe it as a rainbow, then the light can come from whatever direction is required. But I'm looking at the actual Wikipedia article about rainbows, and the angle that you have to be at to see the spectrum that we see is a range of angles, ranging from infrared light, which is 40.6 degrees, wavelength 350 nanometers. That's blue light, so you've got to be able to see at an angle of 40.6 degrees, through to red light, where the angle is 42.5 degrees. So the spectrum will determine the reflection mechanisms that are occurring in the raindrop. And to make it just that little bit more fun to figure out, is the raindrop is in motion. It's falling, or it's rising, or doing something. It's not just suspended in the air. So you end up with different results. But the other thing you get with the rainbow is you'll see the Roy G. Biv, and then some distance away, you'll see the reverse. So it goes blue to red, and then you go some distance away and you see red to blue. It's like an inversion. But that secondary rainbow is much weaker in terms of brightness compared to the one that really takes attention. But I think it's, a lot more involved in terms of what's going on mechanically in the environment to express that rainbow than the mathematics that the guys developed to try and explain it, and the explanation given in optical physics. They've done
maybe it just goes down to the ionization, or the charge that you were talking about earlier about water and clouds being, stable. It's just the medium with which light is traveling through.
Well, one of the things that I've been informed is I made this statement that if you change the electrical environment, you change radioactive decay rates.
That's the same with biology too. You take all different cells from the body and you put them in different petri dishes. You change the electrical environment, and they'll all grow into different things that they weren't originally going to grow into.
So you got resonance structures. In the 1800s, the people were, doing biological experiments with plants. So what they did was they got silicon glass beads, and they introduced stuck a seed in there, and then introduced into it a carbon dioxide feed and a bit of water, and lo and behold, the plant builds phosphorus. Chemical elements that it needs to grow, the trace elements, it builds them. That in the 1800s, we had, when they were doing these experiments, we had proof that biological life is transmuting elements. because these things weren't being introduced into the environment that the plant was going. You know, it was being grown in a bell jar. So, you know, and none of this stuff is recognized by modern biology, because it's just not published. Because if it was published, that'd change all the theory about how biological systems actually behave. And the first thing that's radical is that all the chemical behavior inside a biological mechanism is a nuclear transmutation mechanism. That blows standard theory right out of the water. Whatever explanation you've got doesn't.
Yeah, whichever one it is, it does. Yeah.
Is there examples? Is there examples of animals that transmute materials?
Yeah, chickens.
Of course,
chickens. Chickens will transmute phosphorus into calcium. Humans
grow hair.
Yeah, human beings transmute sodium into potassium to cool.
Yeah, life is transmutation. It's transmuting the elements into living processes, right?
The initiation of birth, whenever a sperm enters the egg, the egg is a vacuumed specific area, and copious amounts of zinc are immediately released upon, the sperm entering into the egg, and that causes, life to, therefore, then, start transmuting. So that even life itself, for the human, is a transmutation of elements.
Yeah, life starts with light, a spark of light, and it ends with a spark of light. See the light at the end of the tunnel, and you spark with zinc when you're whatever that word is, conceived.
Yeah, so
everything in between has just been a lot of distractions, it seems.
Pretty much, but when when Professor Dave was pontificating about how the electrical universe was rubbish 2 years or a year ago, not the most recent, been after a while, but the first one he did, I said, can you explain to me why a chemical reaction has to happen without using electromagnetics? They were challenge too big for him. Because, if you look at chemistry, they all talk about electrical valence being the important thing. Electrical energy is released. If I get chlorine and cesium and do it in a controlled manner, I can produce a 7-volt electrical discharge if I don't have an explosion. And that tells me that there's an electromagnetic dynamism that's required for chemistry to work. And I've taken it a step further to say to get the compounds to form the molecules that do, you need electrons and protons from the different atoms to join together, then separate to create this electrical bonding mechanism. But another weird thing that's occurred is any grouping of elements that will produce a hexagonal ring is going to be very interesting. So carbon produces a hexagonal ring with three single bonds and 3 double bonds that flip. But if I get boron and nitrogen and join them into a hexagonal ring, it's all single bonds.
What's the difference in energy release in those two transactions, though? Do we know?
Well, it's you get different results. The material shows different stability and behavior. But I began to wonder whether the hexagonal structure is an important geometric structure for compounds.
Buddy, hit the mute.
Stability.
Oh, sorry.
So the question
He's
I have
always doing dishes.
Is the hexagonal structure important for chemical stability of a compound? And that's the 6-sided structure. But what about the 8-sided structure? What about the other geometries that are out there?
Well, maybe it's specific to the vacuum with which it's, or at least our containment that we've talked about earlier here in this particular realm. The containment with which we exist determines that the most, I don't know what welcoming structure is that the one you're saying, the hexagonal.
Well, the universe is about creating the most stable structure it can produce in the environment that exists.
Exactly. So if we're
Which is
inside of
it's
this
a loose
environment here,
energy
under these pressures, under these normal temperatures, etc., then
Yeah.
that would make sense.
Well,
That the
you have
actually
a
would be
couple
that.
things to consider. You have a couple things
Hey,
to consider with this regard. So in biological chemistry, you've got geometry is everything. In the folding of proteins, you've got geometry is everything. In atomic theory, you've got geometry is everything. So the size of the subatomic uh, jelly or whatever you want to end up calling it. I'm a fairly close follower to the structured atomic model, where you've got essentially spheres of protons and electrons, and they bind together in different formats. You still have, for instance, geometry of where you can stack those spheres to have a stable structure. The same thing happens when you're talking about chemistry. So the benzene ring, which is a hexagonal structure, is one of the most stable forms. And it's not simply because like a triangle would be a more stable form, but because the size of the atoms themselves that are being arranged, they bump into each other, and so there's that repulsion force and everything as well. So the benzene ring is at this point, for the size of uh, the atoms and everything that we're working with, the benzene ring is the most stable because it is the tightest format that can be achieved, and it ends
But
up
what medium,
not
though?
being
Sorry,
a
Aaron, real
perfect
quick.
ring. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
just to specify, in what medium though? Because we're swapping mediums when you go to compare what we're talking about to a chemical, because then you're talking about actions taking place inside of a different medium.
well,
Well, yes.
all I've said in the papers so far is that as we get you know in a region where we would expect the density of the counter space to be lessened because there's more order in our universe, then we expect the rate of C to decrease, right? Because the induction through the ether is directly affected in proportionality to the counter space. Maybe I haven't said that explicitly in the paper, but basically that's what I'm implying. And that goes along with what Distinti is saying, because when that happens, then more ether is being consumed. And now the only argument is the relative magnitude of the consumption. And he's saying something about 5,000 times the speed of light, and Robert's saying it's a lot more. I don't know that anybody has an answer, but I could say that it must be consuming at an increased rate, which would mean, again, the counter space is at the opposite, and that's why C is being affected. Well, that'll be fun when we get into the actual relativity. Cool. Go ahead.
But I would go further with counter space. Space and counter space are the same thing. It's just,
well, of course they're the same thing. Of course they're the same thing. That's the whole point of this picture and the Gaussian curvature here. You have negative curvature and positive curvature. So, it's the same toroid.
What you've got there the negative and positive curvature, which is fine. But the other thing I would say is, on the outside surface, you've got a charge facing out, and its opposite polarity is facing in. So you would see that. Well, yeah,
that'll be implied in the law of polarity. The law of polarity applies. This is my favorite one, not just because I'm an acupuncturist, no accusations, or Tai Chi or whatever, but because it applies to all the laws. Because it is all one law. It's just separated into different laws. But there's always a polarity. Always, even the void. With the zero, there's the one. It's just all the way through the structure. There's a polarity. So we don't have. I mean, on Wikipedia they call it a theory. It's not a theory. It's a fact.
But that polarity, I keep going back to the medium with which the observation is taking place. And Aaron, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut your train of thought off there for a second. So if you want to pick back up on that, I'm sorry. But doesn't all of the polarities that we've been discussing and all of that matter, it's all dependent upon the environment, or at least the medium, not being perturbed or being perturbed?
Yes. Okay, so the stable geometry, as we were talking about at this point in time, is the benzene ring. Now, if you increase the pressure, like the ambient pressure or the the etheric pressure, whatever you want to call it, if you increase that, then you can compress the atomic size to the point where you can have smaller forms that are actually more stable. But also, if you take two magnets and you put their poles, the same poles together, they're going to repel each other. If you push them together, you can push them all the way until they touch. And so you physically pushing is that counter space that's pushing those magnets together. And so you can force the atoms with higher counter space. You can force the atoms into a closer arrangement, and you can get down to a pentagram, or a pentagonal ring, or you can get down to like your triangle, or something of that nature. So you can get smaller forms that way. So that's where the counter space comes into it. But for this point in time and space, the hexagram is, or the hexagonal ring is probably one of the most stable.
Well, it's perfect that you have done this, because I just shared the screen. Part of what got us going is in the calculation of this curvature constant, we ended up at 10 to the negative 60 meters, or what I call a decamicro. Now, I've mentioned it's an ordained quantization because the definition is now resolved further than the Planck length. By switching Newtonian gravity into an electrodynamical force, we come up with this 10 to the negative 60. So that begs the question, is this related to the hexagonal feature of the 6 divisions, as the Chinese were the first to really express this? Of course, the 60 base geometries or trigonometries of the Mesopotamians may have even been before the 6 division school in China. Obviously, they were affected by the South Pole of Saturn, who is the first expression of the Lord beyond that. I imagine that they had meditators and philosophers. I wish Jay was here. If Jay was here, he would be able to talk about the early days of the first time philosophers began doing existential philosophies. But I would imagine it was probably in the 7,000 to 9,000 years ago period, if not before, in some kind of Atlantean culture, but something that we know of. There must be something happening here, because the D as a sound is also related, and it came up in Ken Wheeler's video, right? He said adios is not adios, it's athios, but the two are related. The D is the plasmaglyphic expression of the cosmic pole power, and it's also a phallic power, and it's literally the Venus and Mars, and then the plasma flow got bent somehow and came down, it looked like a cock and balls. But then you have D, meaning God, and when we say God, it ends with a D sound. So we know that the yow, and then when there's this other D sound, and now we're talking about the decamicro, we're talking about hexagons. There's something happening here with the D.
Simpsons got it right again, man. With Homer Simpson.
Well,
don't.
Isn't that? I think that was a joke about the him and his obsession with pink donuts, right? And so there you go, donut. So Taurus and donut, and the t sound that came up here earlier in the paper as well, or maybe it was later.
And
the T rune and the
torque.
T rune for tension, torque, time, and tau, because tau is 2 pi. And this goes back to the Turan rune, which is a thunderbolt. Go ahead, buddy.
And Tauruses. It's we used to think it was tortoises stacked on top of tortoises, but it's Tauruses stacked on top of Tauruses. So we were almost right.
Yeah, actually, we say toroids. So there's the duh and the T both happening in the word. So it's interesting, this resolution. Am I the first one to ever do this calculation before? Have you guys ever seen this calculation done before? It just came to me the other day, like, well, let's just simply convert.
I haven't run into it, but
I've not either.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
I didn't have any issues with what you've done. I thought that was a reasonable approach.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It wasn't that hard.
The number you have produced will be very close to what it actually is.
Well, you can use here's the spreadsheet, you can go through and see the conversions. But you got to wonder, like the 60. What is that? Is that, is that a real expression? I'm not that worried about the number 1.32. I'm sure if Jay was here, he would start going crazy about something about natural logs or something.
Well,
But
1.6 was it 1.618 is pretty close to the number phi, and you've got a reference
to the Planck length, yeah, that's the Planck length. Yeah,
but your 0.32, if you have it.
Have you guys heard of chelonic science?
No, 0.66. That's almost 2/3. That's interesting. What's your point about that, Robert?
It's geometry.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Two-thirds is 2/3 is you're getting into triangle terms territory.
Okay, so you think that this 1.32?
It's a double triangle, which is a hexagram or a Merkaba cube arrangement.
So now not only is the curvature related to the Gaussian curve on the toroid and to curl, but now you're talking about some type of geometry or trigonometry.
Absolutely. And that's
okay, fair enough. That's what I'm wanting you. That's where I'm wanting you guys to go. I'm like squeezing you through the donut here to talk, because that's Buddy and yours interest.
But what I was saying is that for matter to exist, you need a geometry. You need an oscillation mechanism that causes vibration, and you need a dynamism of motion. And you get all three, and then you can get a matter construct. And it's just how these things join together and how they resonate to produce whatever it is we get to see.
Power of three. Power of three.
Yeah, it's the power of three and the power of prime numbers. They're all over the place. I just, every time I look at this with a little bit of thought, I keep running into the prime number set, just the whole number one, but I think it's it's a bit more convoluted than that. But on a trip, we've got 5 hours to the closest town of driving, and I had my son in the car, and he'd just reviewed my speculation, and I said, and in that in the first version of it, I thought that there was at least 6 different types of matter, and I said, where would we find the matter that was not electromagnetically dominant, but was time torsion dominant or life-death dominant or whatever? Where would you find that matter? And he says to me, and he's got no scientific background of any kind, he says to me, it has to be all around us. We just don't see it.
Oh, I tend to agree with that.
This is crazy. I just looked up electric universe geometry for the first time in a while, and apparently there's on Google, and apparently there's a Vice article about people who believe electricity rules the universe.
Oh yeah, that Vice article's been around a while.
Yeah, since 2016.
Yeah.
Then there's Reddit forums. I didn't know there was Reddit forums discussing me and talking about me. I
boy.
Eventually happened, but I'm waiting to. Reddit's good because people really dig into it.
Dude, Reddit is a disaster field, but I'm glad that you are on there. Yeah, look at that, Buddy James, Geometry of the Electric Universe. Let's open it up. Yeah, Reddit, dude, Reddit is a disaster. I'm gonna join your.
But the interesting thing is that
keep an eye on it.
These things being paid attention to. They might be the people that are in the research area might not be volunteering to put it out there, but they're certainly paying attention to what's being said. I'm sure that some of them have gone away and checked.
Almost have, yeah. I have to agree. They almost have to. How could you not call yourself, a scientist and not look into these things further?
So thinking about the birkeland currents. Okay, I'm just reading. I just went on Reddit real quick, and this guy says the spiral creates efficiency, the ability to adapt variability, momentum, and really what is good for the nature of something. When hot and cold clash, it begins to spiral and eventually forms a storm. Now let me talk about that for a second. Just like hot air rises and cold air falls, same is true in the Birkeland current. When the hot air, when something becomes hot by being exposed to the environment, it warms it up. It seeks its central core, so it starts to build like the beginning of a donut, or sorry, the beginning of a vortex, like.
Yeah, buddy, I'm gonna pop your bubble on that. Go ahead and finish, but I'm gonna show you something. Go ahead.
So I think that the layers have different temperatures. Obviously, that's the stacking order in Markland convection. That's why they have a stacking order in an arrangement, because the different pressure variabilities, the different pressure densities, but also the different temperatures. So these filaments of the Birkeland currents are obviously thermodynamic. They're reacting directly with thermodynamics. It's compression and rarefaction. So,
but
one
that process, buddy, you're going to charge the things that are moving in relation to each other. It's not just a temperature.
Right.
It's the path that they're taking through the thermodynamic fields.
Yeah. But I just realized,
believe it or not, the cold is actually rising too. So this is the latest type modeling they have, and the cold in these tornadoes is the cold air is actually fueling this stream here that's coming in. This is cold air.
Yeah.
And it goes up and is streaming in.
Yeah, it's using the cold air to build its body. Subsequent layers, because it can't use only hot air and it can't use only cold air. That's what the tornado is designed off of that. It has to use both. And then the layers within layers within layers that we see inside of water spouts and that we see inside of donuts, each layer would be a different, extremely different temperature. The eye of the storm is probably warm, when you're inside the eye, just like the bow shock of a tornado or a hurricane coming in, the calm before the storm. There's no wind and it's warm, and then all of a sudden,
it appears to be the feeling of normalcy, which is interesting, because you can feel when Ian was going through Florida. Things up here in Kentucky felt strange. So there's actually a bow shock, as you love to talk about, that's ahead. I thought that the storm was going to come here because of that. It felt like a Mercury retrograde day, and then it ended up going a different direction. But there must be something beyond the clouds happening. But inside that eye, apparently people feel calm, normal, and it confuses them.
Yeah. Well, you're also scared because you got halfway through the storm and you're about to embrace for the other half.
Right.
Nice.
There was two observations about the cyclone or hurricane or typhoon mechanism. It actually follows an electromagnetic trough. So
here we go. Here it is on screen, guys. This is colder. This yellow, that is cold air rushing in. Let me play it again.
What I'm saying is that the motion of the longitudinal motion of the storm system follows an electromagnetic conduit. So unless you're under the path, it's not going to be as devastating for you personally. That's one issue that's going on. Now there was a second one I was going to mention.
But hold on, don't gloss over what we're seeing in there. This is the mainstream. They're doing our work for us. Watch how the cold air spirals as it goes in. You can see it already in the smoke.
Yeah.
That's indicative of a charge behavior, and they're totally missing it. And I feel like he deleted my posts on his channel when I mentioned it.
In a Birkeland current mechanism too. But the second thing that's important is that, and I found this as hearsay, the guys that fly the planes into the cyclones to systems to determine behavior. One of the missions had them going vertically up the eye wall, where they got they proved that the wind directions is bidirectional. And when the guy got back, he said, "Thank you very much for all the flying you've given me, and I'm resigning my commission." Refused to fly. Because the plane, because of you're flying into a clockwise wind and then an anti-clockwise wind at the same speed. You can imagine the stress that's going to put on the aircraft. And he thought literally the aircraft was just going to get demolished while it was doing this thing. And he says, "No, I'm not doing that again. You've cured my desire to fly ever again." And he was not going to do it. So, but the thing is, until they did that fly pattern, there was no evidence that there were counter-rotation wind speeds in the eye wall of a hurricane. And if that's the case, then they're there in a tornado, a dust devil, or anything else that expresses this vortice behavior. So if you look at a water flow, you'll see counter rotation in the actual funnel that's being produced. And I would, you have to expect it. If you're rotating in one direction to balance it out, it's got to be going in the other direction. And
So then it goes.
slightly stronger.
So then the question goes back to charge versus thermodynamics, whether it's temperature gradient or it's charge or it's one and the same. I know you mentioned earlier the temperature is the same.
Yeah.
But in the case of like a water spout or a tornado or anything's a hurricane, would it not be the
temperature?
So once you have the vortices occur and exist, once that's comes into reality, then the thermodynamics kick in, and you have, based upon the fact that matter is now being, controlled by the electrical charge and the attraction of water coming up to the center of trough, like Ramon just demonstrated, this cold air coming up through the center is more of a causality at that point instead of a normality. Does that make sense? Am I saying that correctly? Do you understand my question there?
My approach to that issue would be to say the interaction of charge types like hot and cold, or magnetic north-south, or rotation left-right, or electrical plus-minus. That behavior of that interaction is mirrored or similar in all. So if the behavior I would see for electromagnetics, that behavior I would expect to be similar to behavior with hot and cold and all the rest of it, because you need to have these things working in sympathy, because the common thing that's present in all this motion is the actual rotational mechanisms. So you got motions that produce a spiral conduit that can either expand or contract or vibrate, oscillate over a small distance. And that has to be a common factor for all these other types of charges to be able to interact with each other and have, the illusion that a moving, spinning electric field is producing a moving, spinning magnetic field. What if these two things are separate, and it's the motion that is the linking mechanism that enables all these things to give the appearance that causes
to even occur in the first place.
Yeah.
So yes, temperature and charge are basically one and the same. It's just not really, but they are.
Just a slight, maybe it's a mathematical rotation through a complex number system that just turns electricity into temperature, or turns temperature into magnetics, or whatever. There's some sort of fundamental mechanism that changes what charge is being expressed as dominant. And I think in storm systems and lava eruptions and all the rest of it, the fundamental kickstart to all of this stuff has to be an electromagnetic discharge of some kind. The capacitance has built to a voltage level where a discharge has happened, and when it happens, then we get all the wonderful things that occur.
Temperature would be more the causality of the initiation of the electromagnetic charge to begin with. So temperature becomes more of a causality.
The temperature itself is the charge. If it's cold, it has a certain charge. If it's hot, it has a certain charge. The temperature is the charge.
Or is it just the expression of the charge?
The expression, it's the expression of its charge. But just like a tendril just like a tendril from a plant in botany needs to move around like a worm to find the light and the temperature to know where to grow. The same thing happens inside of a donut in a pool. The vortex and the tubes, the collimated cylindrical, all that's happening is collimated cylindrical geometry. So if you see how the columns wrap and bind around each other, you can tell where the temperatures are. You can tell where the charge is moving, coming in from. If all of matter that we know is formed in collimated cylindrical geometries, then it makes sense. I mean, we also see it in the tornadoes. We also see it in huge weather events. We also see it in Birkeland currents. We see it on the planets, on the poles of the planets with the vortexes and the solid geometries, the form constants. If it's all these geometries, I don't even know what I'm getting at, but there's temperature gradients and differences between each one of these columns, and you can even feel it when I'm outside and I'm working with nature, and I'm doing breath work, and there's people standing all around me. All of a sudden, this cold air comes in from the ground, from around us. This cold air comes in. Where is it coming from? And all of a sudden, it just starts moving up around me, and it starts coming or moving around and past me. What is this? And we have direct ability to work with it and not fully control it, probably, but control it to some extent. Sorry.
But again, I think you're almost not proving my question, but showing that temperature is a result of a charge.
Yeah, well, that's already a thing that's been proposed in the EPEMC framework.
Right.
So that shouldn't surprise anyone.
Okay, so that's
it's also I think it's
even all the way down to the micro to the macro.
I think it's in the nature of things too.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that I read that.
So are we just tossing out all laws of thermodynamics in the sense that thermodynamics have been based upon, really more than anything else, electromagnetic charges?
I don't toss out. What I do is I think that.
Sorry, I didn't.
We in an ordained, the whole point of the ordained is not just for business. We provide better and better definition for the improved numericalization and quantization of data, because the better the resolution we get, it's just like the James Webb Telescope. They're doing the work for us. The better the resolution they get, the better we look. You can now take any of those photos and show them to people and be like, does this look like just some gas burning off somewhere? I mean, what are we really seeing here? The fact is, though, that people are kept distracted from being able to discuss that, and that's what's holding people back. That's part of the culture stagflation. We're beyond monetary stagflation. We're in the culture stagflation. So it's going to be interesting, because we're going to inflate. The culture is going to stagnate. And certain things are going to hyperinflate, like the egos on some of these scientists, I imagine. And we'll see what happens if the Aether concept is correct. That bubble will reach a place where the surface tension exceeds the natural cohesiveness, and there will be a burst. It may already be rupturing in various places, right? A Zeppelin doesn't necessarily explode in one big balloon like burst, like a birthday balloon. You could have the front of it could be blowing out and the other side blowing out. The entire obviously the floating castle of the American Empire, the entire NATO framework, etc., sits on top of this giant balloon. It could be pushing it down. When it all blows out, the question is, where are you? Where am I? Where are our families? There are going to be expressions I imagine, through the electromagnetic fields of the Earth, through the ley lines, as most people commonly call them, where this etheric expression will make itself known. certain areas will probably experience direct vortitional like weather patterns. Hell, who knows? Maybe there'd be a return to thunderbolts. I don't know. I don't know how far this implosion explosion would be, because it's such a crossing to go from pure data to the magnetic field. I mean, could it impact the Earth? I don't know. I think some people on here think that CERN is the whimsical expression of that. But I think that, but let's take Ben Davidson. He senses it, and he automatically assumes that means the Earth is going to flip over. We don't know. But I would assume that there will be an expression in the weather patterns and the economics and other chaotic systems where turbulence is a key factor. And this vortitional expression will be guided by scalar, whatever the scalar and fractal properties are. And I don't know how much energy it takes, because scalar, it's supposed to not require any extra energy, but I don't think anybody's ever proven the scalar concept like they found it. So I personally assume that there's an energy consumption when you go from, say, the economy collapsing to the generation of stronger hurricanes, and the entire feedback to the solar electric circuits, the entire solar system electric circuit. Whatever is causing humans to behave the way that they are, and for the POS wave to continue, is going to be related to these chaotic effects that we see. And the definition of that is why we need the ordained standard. We have to get quantized about it if we're going to understand it all. Otherwise, we might as well just form churches. You guys form a church, I form a church. I guess Aaron and I could theoretically form the same church because we're in the same state, and then we could do it the old ways. We just go back, and everybody just be ready to clobber some heads, and mankind could get stupid again. I'm ready for everybody to get stupid. I really am. I got will. Will is a force of nature. He is ready. No, but seriously, I would like to guide us through a spacer's solution to this problem, personally.
Yeah. The thing you've got to realize is that everything is interconnected in ways we do not even realize, let alone able to describe. So what we've worked out after the last 17,000 years or 17 millennia is that the skull cracking mechanism doesn't produce the desired outcome. So
it produces a desired outcome. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but it's not a desired outcome that results in the.
Hold on. Rex wrote me. Rex texted me. You know what Rex texted me? He texted me yesterday. The White House was having a press conference about the proposed Bill of Rights for the AI. And I said, won't stop me from shooting a robot in the effing face. He said, you big bully. I said, I know, right? I'm sorry, Bill of Rights for you could do it all you want. I will shoot. I will shotgun a walking back-legged dog robot with a little camera on it. I will shoot it in the freaking face. I will put on a mask or whatever I got to do, and I will shoot it in the face because I've been raised on Terminator. I just do not see this going anywhere good. But so that's what the fascists are up to now. The Bill of Rights, they want to trample yours, and then they want to give it to the AI. So the Aether is perhaps fueling a anti-Lord. I don't know. Maybe it's a new expression of the Lord. That's a whole different discussion, I guess, mathematically, whimsically. Discuss, what is this AI producing? But I know this. It's all got to be fueled by the same Aether source. And the only thing about the Aether is that it's numerical.
I agree with that.
Other than that, it's basically the same. So if we are going to continue to inflate derivatives and try to run the world off of derivatives instead of just calories, which is what it used to be run off of, if you really stop and think about it, it's run off of calories and gold and blood. It's still run off blood. I guess gold's involved in there somewhere, but it's mostly now run off of this fiat Aether. Then there's the physics of that is going to affect our reality, and it's going to be affected by our reality. So this recession is not merely coincidental or planned. I mean, it is a result of changes in the electric system. I think that's entanglement.
I'm under the impression that the power of numbers is being strangled with the fiat currency, and the AI and the technology is um, providing an outlet. And if we provide a bill of rights or something of that nature to the technology and numbers and electricity, like through these mediums, then we're going to lose our seat of power over those various aspects.
Right.
So, but talking about
You know what's
how
funny?
you
Hold
don't.
on, but before you go on, do you know that yesterday's call was all about power and access? Well, we didn't really get into power much, but we did get into access a lot. So I mean, you're right in tune with where the mind of the group is. Okay, continue.
As you were talking about the laws of thermodynamics and how we don't throw things out, I think that's it's perfect to do it that way, because science should be based on observation, and a lot of the theories and numerical proofs and everything that we have of the world right now was based off of our understanding of visual observations. And so, as we continue to dive down this path, we shouldn't get to the point to where we're throwing out laws and theories and things, but instead refining them to the nature as we can continue to observe them in greater precision. So, the laws of gravity, as an example, so the 9.82 meters per second squared, and the big G, and your Avogadro's number, and stuff of that nature. To me, all of those pieces are
It's
macro
usable data. Yeah, it's
interpretations.
usable data
Yeah,
for sure.
but they're specific for this point in space and time. And if you were to take, for instance, our laws of physics and go to the other side of the galaxy, they would likely fall apart, because the
Right.
uh, the numbers and the assumptions and the rounding and stuff that we do, those are expressions that we truncate, and so we say pi is 3.1415, so on and so on. Like, that is the number of pi, but pi should be broken down, and it should say this is the further equation of pi, and this is going to give you the specifics of it, and this is why the numbers work that way. Same thing for your Avogadro's number. Avogadro's number is that's what gives you your chemical like gas constants and things of that nature. So the molecular interaction, or I guess the molar interaction of atoms in a volume of space. So Avogadro's number then should be an expression of the etheric pressure, if you will. So I would love to see the numbers that you came up with, the electrical equation that you have in that paper just above. I would love to see if that can be extrapolated into Avogadro's number, because it may be able to give us further insight into the stable geometries of our current point in space-time.
So I've got to make a point, and I've made this point before. See this volunteer standards? You guys can write EPEMC, messy papers, MIMS papers. You don't need my permission or anything. Just do it. You guys want to talk about Avogadro's constant? You want to talk about you want to talk about how the big G is related to the Einstein's G, or Newton's G? I mean, do it. It's perfectly fine by me. I'd be happy for that, because there's something interesting happening. This has happened with the L, and the fact that Buddy had an entire thing called Love is Watching, completely separate from the whimsical analysis, and yet we end up with an L4 standard, an R4 standard, D4, whatever. These runes were plasmaglyphic to begin with, and there's crossings happening. That's an entire series of linguistic MIMS that I have, again, in my EPEMC versus EU. I gave EPEMC a light green and just said plasmaglyphics. That's all mostly Colbrin and Chinese. So there's a whole range of linguistics discussion that could come back and talk. I have already definitely shown there's strong evidence that the birkeland current itself is housing or responding to the positions of these laws. And here's how we get there. Both the Bagua Taichi 2 and the Ashgal-Yammer show synchrotron toroids in an 8 position called the 8-spoked wheel of life, which is a worldwide motif. And then you have the 5 phases, and on Jupiter we have the transition from the 8 to the 5, from the north to the south. If we go in that direction, it might go the other way, by the way. And then when you overlay all of these and you start looking at them diagrammatically, you end up with these overlaps that are too good and at explaining Newtonian and current physics, Big Bang, whatever, all these guys to be coincidental. And now you have these runes that have useful letter words. I mean, Gauss's name just happens to start with a G, but it is pretty useful in this analysis and this correlation effect. Now, it could be just completely in our minds, but then again, the entire universe might just be a mind field. So something's happening there, and I encourage everybody to produce. Take the time. If you have a suspicion, take the time. It may not even with the Messy standard. It's short. It could be 2 pages long. I'll give you a copy of the template that you can use. It's not too hard to produce.
And Ramon, I have something that I would like to share that I think would help consolidate a lot of our thoughts.
Sure, go ahead.
I shared it in the group. I'd love for you to play it. It's a little video when you get a minute. It's called the Laplace transform. Now, when we see the Laplace transform in motion, we'll see the Dougherty set. We'll see exactly what we've been talking about. And the Laplace transform is mathematics of differential equations to explain light and the dynamics of light, for a quick terminology there. There's better terms and terminology once we look it up and once we watch a little bit of this video.
Yeah, I'll open it in just 1 second. I'm almost done.
Yeah, just for the sake of clarification, what they're saying here on Wikipedia, it's an integral transform that converts a function of a real variable, usually t in the time domain, to a function of a complex variable, s in the complex frequency domain, also known as s-domain or s-plane. So the transform has many applications in science and engineering because it is a tool for solving differential equations.
Yeah, that's exactly. So it's really, really, really cool because it's pretty much all possible outcomes on the Laplacian transform in a circuit that is inverse square. That the whole circuit uses the inverse square law for all of the 4 fundamental forces.
Right.
So,
and again, the guy's last name just happened to start with an L. Yeah. It just happened to start with L. Isn't that interesting?
Here for these transforms using imaginary numbers, what would Distinti's mathematical treatment do to Gaussian?
That'd be a good question. I used to have a copy of his physics software, but it's going to be way out of date now. Somebody needs to. Buddy, you're friends with Lori. You could probably get her to get you a copy of the physics software. Maybe not. I don't know. But then you could run all sorts of programs through his physics, which I believe he had updated with the Vortex algebra.
Because in his treatment of being square root of -1, he's turning it into a matrix of
A matrix,
real
yeah, right.
So you'll the transforms here, I'm just curious as to how they'd work, where all the numbers are real.
Well, they'd probably produce a Dougherty set.
Oh, just
And then if you were to sonify that, it would produce reality.
There you go.
AR, artificial reality, or
That's-
the reality we're in that's just a projection of the outside layer of the tube that's on top of us. It could be just skins. It could be like M's, membranes.
Yeah,
lines,
it could be.
You know, and I can take the Dougherty set and show stacking layers and hierarchies and lowerarchies of any type of system, whether it's Indras and cyclical temporal spatial Indras of time and lineage, so calendrics, or I can take it and break it down into individual creatures, everything. You can really you can use the Dougherty set as data mapping, as a new way to map and to show information. So it's also useful. Like, have you ever seen information diagrams? All of us have. Now they have new information diagrams where the circles show the proportions of different things, and it helps us to easily digest the information better.
Has anybody here ever had the suspicion that we're all essentially a MIMS for God to figure himself out? You ever had that feeling like you are a simulating? You're one of these little balls floating around on the surface there.
I sat down.
Actually,
a meditation that I had.
I did that
2 years ago.
on mushrooms once.
I'm sitting. I'm having a meditation, and I'm asking that question. I asked exactly that question, Ramon. I said, what is the meaning of this? What is this all about? What the hell is going on here? Is basically the intent that I went into the meditation with, and it was an emotional time for me.
What I would say is,
and the answer that I got back was, "But that's what I have you for."
Yeah, exactly. I would say right now, even though none of us are on ayahuasca or anything, right now we are able, through this discussion, to approach the asymptote, which creates the feeling of unity and similarity between us, but also we're doing it intellectually rather than having to meditate for 10 hours and acquire a rainbow body and abstain from grain and all this, which is fine. I mean, the religions have their approach. We're using a white path approach, and the white path approach is heavily into science. That's just the direction the white path has taken, mostly because a lot of the early stuff got burned, and I guess the white path was not to be held down. So this is the direction it went.
Remember when we talked about hands a while back in one of our calls? We were talking about being the thing, but I think that's what we might be, just the feelers, the hands of God, in the sense of pulling in this esoteric energy, and
quite possibly.
Well, I have a take on this from the speculation. The consequence of the sort of thinking I've had with charge and construction is that God is a fractal being, and the constitute parts of God is beings like us. So if we take the view that God is the universe and it's the construction building block of everything, then he builds us. It builds us, but we also build it. So it's a dual flow mechanism.
Correct.
So our point of being here in the environment that we're in is to learn. Because we're limited, we learn. And God can cause anything to be instantaneously. So how do you learn?
All music in the Geometric View episodes is produced and created by Skullet. That's S-K-U-L-L-E-T.
Well, you also invent a mystery that can't be solved. And when I say solved, I mean finished, in the same way that when you finish your math homework and you turn it into your teacher, you like go skipping about because you're done with it.
So if you want to talk about Big Bang, as it were, the only Big Bang that's happening is the understanding.
True.
I don't remember.
And then the collective ability for humanity on the planet to elevate their current levels of understanding.
Yes.
Well, okay, so we're back to ultimately where we got from the Union and 5 and 8 a few weeks ago. The flipping of the wrench, the why is it happening, and then looking at the rotation, the Vortex math, and its connection in the same region between vibration and plasma, and through the gravity and magnetics, through the force, and over here towards the metal electricity. And in particular, as you brought it up, we have all this correspondence that flows along, and here is your question, like what is God? So we're looking at, it's a dual direction spiral, of an energy flow. We use the Fibonacci standard in order to, I guess, mimically express it. But then it's the combinations of all these different aspects that start to constitute reality. And Buddy's assertion, which is quite strong, and it has a lot of evidence, is that you can use geometries to work your way through that web, that interconnected web, so that you can produce these futurizations, these whimsical approaches that can help mankind, and which is what we're interested in. If Spacers itself is to be a MIMS, we've got to learn from the past and improve the future. And how do we do that on an active man? In the same way the natives, they could have screwed up Yellowstone too, or Kentucky if they'd wanted, but they didn't. They took care of it. They didn't take care of each other, but they took care of the land. And they understood, if they're going to be involved in an interaction with this land, why not maximize the creative field? And the creative field for them was hunting grounds. So what is our creative field? If it's going to be a spacer society, because we don't want to go back to Vikings and world wars and genocides, and none of us really like the plastic existence. We live it because we have to. We have kids, we have bills, we have cars, which are poison expellers, or made with poisons, but that we understand that they're all temporary. So maybe it's hypocritical of us, but we get to excuse ourselves for a little bit, forgive ourselves, and move forward. I have something that puts out all sorts of poisons and uses gas. Aaron has a Tesla, which has lithium in it. I mean, it's not ideal, but we're moving forward towards something. We have something we're spiraling towards. And my conjecture, which is sort of how it came together. It's interesting that Buddy and I started in different places, but we come together with this idea that we could futurize. We can bring this data from the void space into the current reality, even before our technology has caught up to it, which would be ironic because right now technology is running faster than anything. It's the only thing hyperinflating other than the Federal Reserve. It's all moving faster than people, and people aren't liking it. And it's been bad for the children. So
that's what technology is, though. Technology is only us developing a way to draw off of the natural wheelwork of nature. That's what technology is. It's just us developing. It's through biomimicry and technomimicry.
Yes. That's Will's
understanding.
Theory, by the way. Will wants to write that messy because he's in a neuroscience, and he's been coming to me and he's been talking about it. And I'm like, yeah, write it up. Biology and technology, evolutionary theory. Go ahead. It's just one of the 8 laws. I told him it's just one of the 8 laws, but it's still an important thing. Now, the law of evolution is hanging out up here at the 0 and 1 in the void. So there's all this potentiality, and chaos is down here over in the 3 with the ether in the C region, where So it's interesting, this polar X. What was John? You were interested in the X thing. Was that all just because of Elon Musk this morning? Because there's an X and there's a. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that is interesting because there's an X polarity set up and there's a cross polarity set up.
Right.
If you use
the fact that I had saw what you wrote yesterday, and you had just written it, and then he had texted his tweet at about the same time,
Yeah.
reference to that. It was just.
It is pretty similar. It is pretty interesting. Of course, X marks the spot, right? God's in the middle. That's what Elon needs to start tweeting about. Anyways, that's just me being judgmental. I know I do think it's interesting the evolution being tied to technology, and then look what's over here. What is the paper? This just hit me. Technology is the zeroth domain of war, and we've been talking about violence. This number 13 here below the secret name for God, Yao, this triple ray is both those are rays of light, but they're also thunderbolts. My understanding is that they're thunderbolt heads. They're the trident spear. It's a double entendre that the ancients came up with, and they knew about it. Now I think when they used it for Christ, they made it vertical into the W, and that's because I'll pull that up while you guys talk about the chaos and the zeroth domain.
There was one thing I was going to make a comment about developing technology. If we develop technology that is in tune and mimicking biology that is life-giving, then we build technology that's of value. It's good for us.
Yeah, we have biotech.
But if we do build technology that is against life, it can be biologically based, but if it's against life, it's destructive to us.
Okay, I was wrong about the W. It is so the Alwyn earthwork that they put at the head of the cross where Christ's head would be on these were the Madoc Welsh Christians that were here. This is in Richmond in Madison County on the top secret base. I know that you guys remember. I'm reminding the audience. The earthwork is facing down. So anyways, it's back to the same glyph for God.
I'm having whole new, deeper understandings. Just like extremely new awakenings. Just by understanding the Dougherty set on a level that I've never been able to understand it. Not even intuitively, more like it is reality. So now, like, I understand even more about every gate, and like new design concepts. I'm gonna show off every single individual gate, what it looks like. But what's so weird is it's all worms. So it's worms, every single tentacle, because this is all. If it's a filamental nodal universe, like everything's pointing out to be, and all of these filaments and nodes are interconnected, these filaments have beginnings. These filaments have outside parameters and edges, invisible dark mode plasma that envelops and creates wombs for each one of these birkeland currents. And this is what holds them and keeps them alive. And it's literally connected directly to our DNA and what allows creatures to eat each other and not destroy the universe.
Robert, what did you say earlier, Robert? You were talking about how in a pentagrammal shape, pentographical shape, it created form automatically.
The geometry, well, the space mechanisms and the transforms of what's creating the forms. So we have geometry that's tetrahedral that produces a variety of outcomes. But that tetrahedral variety can produce cubic structure. It can produce dodecahedron structure. It can produce octagram structure, icosahedron structure, because the tetrahedron is common to all of them. Which the consequence to that is the reason why I was saying that the geometry that's important is the tetrahedron, but the forms that we can create is based upon the nodes in a grid structure. So imagine the universe mapping is a grid of tetrahedrons, not a grid of cubes. And if it's a grid of tetrahedrons,
yeah.
the forms and shapes you can create is, way more expressive in terms of geometry mechanisms.
Well,
Then you've got helical interactions that produce DNA structures. So the DNA could act as an antenna that you could stimulate externally to the biological mechanism. And if you do it in a controlled and safe manner, there is no reason why the body that has that DNA could not instantly transform from whatever shape it is into some other shape. If you do it wrong, you're going to end up with a dead creature. But if you do it right, you'll end up with a transformed creature. So, and that sort of ideas, sort of existed in religions more the Eastern ones.
Well, look at the pentagram and the pentacle, and putting a circle around yourself and then inscribing a pentagram inside of it, and black magic and stuff like that. I mean, these shapes have power. What's going on here is every single shape that I make into manifestation, when it's a 3D form, I make these crystals through bubble sculpting, and every one of these have power. They are in and of themselves, just because they exist and you're looking at them, and it transforms you. And like the Ouija board, there's 3D shapes that can be made. There's new games, satanic games and shape games and future technologies. This is what it's going to be about. It's not going to be Legos, baby. It's going to be it's going to be hyperbolic geometry. It's going to be hyperbolic geometries that connect to each other to show the interactions and connections of electromagnetism, and sphere stacking. Those magnetic balls are fun. People buy them by the thousands and build structures with them. That is exactly what's going on. There has to be an opposition of the opposed ends connected to each other in order to build any structure. And they have to be able to fit nested, in certain stacking and arrangement orders. But I have something that I'd love to share with the group.
Go ahead, share screen.
All right, here. Share screen.
Yeah, I had to take care of some business, so I stopped sharing screen already.
All right. Okay. This is the Dougherty set, in numerical order and stacking arrangement. And there's patterns, all sorts of amazing patterns that emerge out of this. So if you look on the far left, the numbers that are in green, those are all the individual number. Those are all there's the first birkeland current, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The seventh, by the time you get to the seventh birkeland current off of source, you're already starting at 13 as the outside layer of that birkeland current. 13. So it goes in this order. This is how the stacking and arrangement order goes. And subsequently, they nest inside of each other quaternally, and it gets into the trillions quick. And so every single creature in the universe is one of these stacking arrangements, and then another creature is a creature. So there's a creature above, below, and side to side to you, and that's true.
That makes sense.
With all creatures, and that's how the system is God. It is the enveloping of light becoming. It's the universe observing itself, becoming. Now, what's really, really interesting here is, okay, so the first 10, by the time you're to the first 10 concatenations or 10th Birkeland current off of the system, and these are all individual. Each one is enveloped, like I said, it's entombed and wombed with an outside layer. Every outside layer is one of these. These are the outside layers, the very first outside layer of the Birkeland current. So it would be the 53rd gate. This one's the 53rd gate off of the center. And then inside of it, subsequently, you'd have it doubling its frequency or its numbers through toroidal embedding, toroidal nesting, which would be wave nesting and wave embedding as well. So if you look at the first one, the very first Birkeland current, this is mainly what I show the audience. There's an infinite amount of them. I've mapped all the way up to the 32nd one, and they just get so small that it's so hard to work on the tiny geometry of it. It rapidly gets extremely smaller and smaller. So the first Birkeland current we have here, Nest also has 2, which Robert often talks about. The first one being a primary number, which I also believe, and 2 being a primary number, which I also believe, because well, they just inside of the system they are. 2 might not be, but anyway, 1 is. So this is the normal frequency that I've been showing.
Two is a prime number.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, that's what I meant. Anyway,
it's only divisible by itself in 1 in terms of
the only even. Yeah, it's the only even one that's primary. Right. So what's super awesome here is you get to okay, so yeah, you have your standard 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 32, 64, 128, 256. By that time, that nesting is past a Sidonian. You have your quaternion, which is 4, octonian, which is 8, Sidonian 16, and then it just keeps going on and on and on. And these types of, this is how we built our computer system, and this is how the binary system of matter unfolds in that order inside of the egg, how the egg goes through mitosis and meiosis. So anyway, you can see that 5 here, the third one is 5, 10, 20, 40, 80, but there's certain patterns in here that I'm seeing. There's a really strange pentagonal pattern of 5s, and it's a repeating code that's in here. So I believe I found the repeating code of space DNA. I discovered. Wow, that was loud. I discovered the in DNA you have, what is it, G, you have CXYK or whatever. There's 4 of them. Anybody? There's 4 base.
I don't know the 4 base ones on it.
Yeah. So
what are we talking about?
DNA
the
has
4
DNA, ATCG.
Yeah, ATCG.
But they occur in strict 2 binary arrangements. So 2,
that's right.
2 and 2 always go together. But the consequence of the encoding mechanism is you end up with a 4-state cell at the base, and then you arrange them in segments of 3 to get a binary encoding that's trinary. And I suspect that the answer is that if you can get arrangements of 5 and 7 and 11 and so on up the number scale, you'll get additional information encoding. So it's not just a single binary solution.
this is the ether. This is data as ether, and this is the geometry of it. And what I discovered here is that there's a base pairing that happens, and I can predict where and when any other toroid is inside of every other structure. So now my mind is actually wrapping around this, you guys. I'm actually understanding it, like on a level that I was never able to understand it before. Because once you take this chart, you can actually understand reality based off of it. Instead of understanding your reality as a fractal reality or all these other wave particle types of realities, you can actually start to understand the dynamics of how everything is how the information of every system is a higher order of the information from another system, and you can actually differentiate subphylums and phylums and dogs and birds, and then you start. So I'm trying to actually find out. Anyway. So I got off on a tangent. I discovered the base pairing of spatial-temporal proximity of creature from source, a direct code, like DNA has the ACKY or whatever you said it was, the 4 base, asunamine, glutamine, whatever. There's 4. The space-time DNA has a very similar, but it's 5, and it constantly repeats itself and centers itself inside of zeros. Now here, I guess I'll just show you guys right now. 5. Every 5th one all ends with zeros. See 0, 0, 0, 0, 10, 20, 40, 80, 160, 320. Now you go down 5 more. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it planes out in another 0, which it zeroes itself out. So because it does this, this allows a property of this allows us to understand that there is a code inside of it, because they're showing a code. Then you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. But then you start to realize, holy shit, there's actually a code inside of these numbers, and they're a helical code. There's a helical code of numbers that just breaks this down like super simply into a repetitive code. For example, I have 28 here. To the right, there's a 6 at the end, and to beginning it, there's a 4. Above it, there's a 0, and below it, there's a 6. So it goes by the very end number, and then all of a sudden, based off of this code that's surrounding these, you already know that when you're looking at this, you're looking at the Dougherty set. So you know that this tube is inside of this tube, and this. So every beginning tube that starts the birkeland current is always odd. That's why the primary numbers exist, and there's a certain special pattern that we're understanding, but we don't understand it because we can't wrap our heads around it. But once you understand it in the terms of the Dougherty set, you understand that all of this hierarchical stacking is because of it has to be like this. So you have the outside body as 19. Every subsequent number is always an even number after that very first Bessel function that starts the beginning. I call it a beginning of the birkeland current. It's the birthing. So what's really interesting here is we know some fun numbers. So where does the fun numbers fall on? All right, a couple of them right off the bat. 144,000. Where would that sit inside here? And what's that all about? Oh, okay. So now you're starting to see life as gates and it being a part of the substructure of the space-time, and we are the process crystal that's going through it. There's a completely unique, 100% unique experience that everything is having. Every single atomic scale is uniqueness. There's no other way around this. That's why we all have different thumbprints, fingerprints, DNA. Even twins have everything, things that are different. So,
one of the things I'm going to observe here for you is that in the prime number set, there are two numbers that are very, very special outside of one. That's
23 is a good one.
Number 2 and number 5. They're special because when you invert the number, you create an inverse, you end up with a terminating decimal. And that does not occur for any other prime number. So the number 2 and the number 5 form a boundary condition, which is why you're getting these. So if I have 5 as my ending number, I'll always get a 0 when I start playing with multiplications. And when it's a 2, you'll always produce an even number. So the nesting mechanism you're talking about is that maybe the feature of 5 is creating the separation boundary that's needed to do scaling mechanism.
Well, what I'll do is I'll map out all of those, and I'll see why there's a recursion every fifth, and what the fifth has to do with all of this. Why the 5 is phi when you do a 5-point pentacle star. Why is it? And it's not bad. It's powerful, but it's been used by the dark arts to try to have some mysteriousness and mischievousness to it.
I plead the fifth.
It's all of these have been used. Everything is geometry. Now okay.
The fifth.
One of my
buddy, sorry, real quick, buddy, just to clarify, point of clarification. So what you're saying, this basically would technically be the baseline structure for the Dougherty set. So if we were to drop any perturbation into the baseline structure here, the output or the variation that it would create by dropping in any kind of variation into this, what we get out, that delta that we get out, would explain matter. Or
all right, here's what here's what I want to do. I want to close up the episode that I was doing, hit the stop record, and then get a start recording so Buddy can do a part 2 and you guys could get really deep into this, because I've got some things I got to do. Before we go, I just wanted to share something on the screen. You guys may assume that most of the views, the information that people are downloading is like new papers, but I was looking through the analytics and we are getting a smattering of different kinds of downloads. So Plasma Electromagnetic Sky, here's a couple memes in a row. Magnetic Universe, Winning the Cold War. Here's the Ken Wheeler one, Plasma Glyphics, the new one, Mims Violence. Shangdi, Heaven and Tao. Here's more plasma glyphs. The pseudoscience cannot be dark matter. And here's a philosophy one. Then the Giza Stone Mover out of nowhere. Carmelin. So there's people doing the Welsh stuff. The Electric Universe memo. That's an oldie. The threat. So addendum 2, the Thunderbolt. Let's see here. Mims Strong Letter. Here's somebody really liked looking at that one. And then the responding to the Cosmic Hoax, which is alien related. So you just never know what people are going to be into. So I'm going to stop this episode. Concept took us so far, and now because I'm having the same experience, Buddy. The more that I do the diagrammatica, the more that I interact with the Dougherty set, the more MIMS research I get, the more depth, the more that I'm pulling out of the EPEMC. It's kind of crazy, and I would feel crazy, except I'm completely normal.
Yeah, it's just so strange. It is crazy and strange, and it's like we found it. Like I discovered a tool that's not only a teaching tool, but it's like you can map data on it. You can also understand the universe. You can also understand like things that are almost impossible to understand that biology stopped giving a fuck about a long time ago. Like we got to Darwin, and all of a sudden we haven't advanced past that speciation theory. There's an electrosonic speciation theory that's about to explain all of this with numbers and math and geometry, and that's the Dougherty set. And it's beyond that, it's just going to be everybody explaining it electromagnetically. It's the PEM, it's the plasma electromagnetism.
That's right. The stagflation surrounding biological pursuit is definitely undeserved on account of if the law of evolution occupies that void space and is drawing from the spongy counter space, and all this chaos is involved, well, then it must be that people are holding the theory back. And the Gaia hypothesis is a good example. You know, there's a lot of evidence for the Gaia hypothesis and for cooperative advantage. And these traditionalists just come out and just squash all over it and say there's no data. It's just like the zip flaw thing with the junk DNA. Somebody comes out, no, it's not zip flaw. There's no language inside the junk DNA. And it's not surprising. It's just the reaction of people who don't look at things in a broad mind, a syncretic or just even a true skeptical mind. They're just doubters.
Well, I'm glad. I honestly think that nobody's had it. I honestly think that nobody's ever had it. We still don't know it, and I still think that it's an evolving fractal evolution of crystallized perception and us growing up to all understand this in a deeper manner. Even when you understand Ken Wheeler or any of these people's Steinmetz or Einsteins or string theory or anything, you take this all and you still don't understand much of anything. But if you have like this real stacking structure that's really describing what plasma physicists were talking about as birkeland currents, and this you have this order. All of a sudden you have these things that start to make sense as time overlaps time, and you can look back in time and you can sort of look in the future. And what is this thing we're in? What is this? You know, and then you realize it's all spirits. The whole thing is 99% spiritual, which is the electromagnetic spectrum. What is it doing everywhere? Like these layers, these plasma in its three modes, dark mode, arc mode, and glow mode are. This is the future. Going to Mars, no thanks. How about going to everywhere in the universe from your home? You know, not having to design it because the design's already there. It's tapping into it because that's
just surfing. We just got to surf it.
Surf it, exactly. Surfing the internet, surfing the universe.
Frequency surfers.
So, yeah, I, as an Epiphany surfer, that's what I call myself, because all of the radical realizations that I've had, one after another, with all these hundreds of thousands of cartographs and maps that I've designed, it's so transformative. And I know that all of us are going to start going through some of those at our own times. I can't force feed anybody. It's going to just trickle in. Like MC Escher trickled into the woke, made people woke, like artists, like Pablo Picasso changed people's perception and destroyed the old mentality of the tyrannistic Hitler-esque type of thinking that, oh no, art has to be created in a certain way. You're destroying our thought of art. No, we got to transcend borders. I'm an artist. I push the border and I push the edge on everything around me, always. You know, it's just who I am and what I do. But if we want to go back into this this set here, here I'll share my screen.
Just wanted to say thanks, Robert. for the patience on giving me answers on the velocity thing, man. I think we covered it quite well, but I appreciate the patience earlier during the call on that one.
No, it's all good. I mean, my approach is, it's all well and good to describe a process we observe, but questions that are sitting there is, why is it that process? Why is it not some other process? Why does that process actually happen?
Yeah.
There's a deeper understanding, and there's a series of inputs that occur to this. A few years ago, I used to have these visions that I was in this basically a lecture theatre, but nothing like we've experienced here. So imagine you got a space in front of you that's 120 degrees in arc, and you've just got, I don't know, 100 rows of seats going up, and behind that is this huge glass covering, like a big curved structure. And here am I giving a presentation on the speculations that I had, how a photon is created, how matter construct has to have these features of the face. And this is like years ago now. And then in 2007, so that's around 2014, 15 that those visions were occurring. And one of the visions I had was being escorted to this huge library and then come into a study cell where I'm given access to whatever the records were. And this very distinct feeling that I, because I was, human, wasn't allowed there, but I was escorted into the environment, and the people that were, providing access to researchers were told that you are to give this person access. You are to treat them with the respect that we give to ourselves. And so I had the feeling that maybe I'm going in there and I'm able to read all this stuff and research it. However, I've got no conscious memory of what it is that I read. And it stays locked up until someone asks me a question. And without too much thinking, I explain the things that are going on. So I'm just beginning to wonder, have I agreed to be a teacher of things that are hidden at the right time? And if that's true, then
without even knowing it.
Yeah. So it's like that's a job you volunteer for or agree to do. So it's a bit like some of the experiences that others have had, the spiritual thing. But I don't have a process. But my colleague was saying, yeah, I was at that presentation because I was describing some of these things. And he says, I was at the presentation, and when I was after you gave it away, I was talking to other people that were there. And the other people that are there that had come along to this presentation about, the nature of the universe, were people who were poets, writers, authors, artists, musicians, all these other fields that, you wouldn't think that, science applies to them, or the constructional nature of the universe is something that's important to the things they do. And there's a lesson in there for me in some respects. So there's even entertainment and building shows and movies and things like that. There's a whole range of inputs into an understanding. So while I've built a framework, as it were, it's not up to me to necessarily flesh the entire thing out. Just as for Ramon, it's not the case of he's got to write every paper. But I've been in hiatus since 2017 because I wanted to rewrite my speculation and clean up all what I know is wrong in there. But it's almost like, no, not time to do that. I've been thinking about it, but not actually getting out the keyboard and making any changes. I find it very when I get in to rewrite a chapter or add additional information, I can't really charge on in it like I did when I first created the stuff. So it's
I think
almost
you said it yesterday. There's a time and place for everything. Almost, you said that in the chat. I mean, you're not saying it that way, but it's almost like there's a time and place for almost everything.
Yeah, there's a time when the mainstream refusal to accept the evidence and all that sort of stuff that we criticize. There will come a time when it will just be accepted, and the old way of thinking will just go away, because it's time. An idea that whose time has come is just impossible.
Just gonna come. Yeah,
it's going to happen. So. But anyway, that was
I appreciate it, man.
But I'm glad I'm able to help people, think sideways.
Right? It's working out. So, Bud, are you still there? He put himself on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah, you're good. No, yeah, the question I had originally before we swapped over calls was, if this is considered the baseline mapping for the Dougherty set in static, is that what I'm looking at there? Is that what you're saying this is? Basically the static approach?
This is the actual spatial-temporal nodal filamental arrangement of all possibilities in the Dougherty set.
Ah, I gotcha. So this is basically the probability of the nodes existing or coming into existence with no perturbations present.
Yeah, and I don't think that there needs to be perturbations. Perturbations start after the insular capsule of the beginning of the Birkeland current. So first the womb starts, which is the outer layer of the Birkeland current.
Which does that? Okay, so sorry to interrupt you, man. But does that dictate the nodes themselves? The creation of that node in the position that node's created in, then creates the subsequent nodes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's position and velocity dependent from source. Any source system that is in the inverse square law that we are in, that all of our four fundamental forces fall subject
categorized. Right.
Exhibits this exact same toroidal vortexural architecture. So
from this base, so basically, if you were to look at it from an architectural standpoint, the difference between line 1 at the top and then line, say, 17 down towards, there's 33 nodes on line 17 versus 1 on line 1.
That would be the beginning of. Okay, so the 13th Birkeland current, or let's say the 12th Birkeland current off of source, starts right there. The
with 23 potential nodes.
No, starts. This is the position of where it starts, and the beginning of the outside. So this is the beginning of a Birkeland current. All these numbers are the very beginning of a Birkeland current, and they are position dependent
upon the previous
on source, how far away from source it is. So that's why there's a bunch of strings that are pointing directly at the center of the galaxy that we discovered, and we don't know what they are.
Right.
These are those. They said they found hundreds of thousands of strands that are just pointing directly at the center of the galaxy, and they're filaments. These are those. These are the filaments that start the construction of, because if our solar system is inverse square, or in the inverse square law, or square root 2, it's probably a consequence of our galaxy being in the same law. So all Birkeland currents and all matter formation stacks on starts off of Markland convection, and has to be a certain distance from the sun or from the center of the galaxy.
Right. Yeah. The layering.
Yeah.
Effect.
So it's position dependent. It's position dependent, and each one of the beginnings has an entire life that it holds and harbors. And inside of that Birkeland current, inside of the 12th, 12 is a great number, right? The apostles and Jesus,
right.
And all sorts of other wonderful things we know. Time, sexagesimal. Anyway, 23 happens to be my favorite number, and in the 12th Birkeland current. So this is just these numbers highlighted in green here. These are just counting like the 12th Birkeland current, but these are actually where the
starting point is
where it starts. Yeah, and then subsequently every number beyond 23 that's in the same grouping nesting going this way is quaternity iterative geometry, toroidal, historical, toric geometry that makes up the inside of the worm, the inside of that individual Birkeland current.
Okay, and so the blank spots that you have there, or is that another styling of the pattern there?
The blank spots? No, I just haven't filled.
Just haven't filled them out yet. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought
it takes forever. No, I mean it's an infinite amount of numbers and an infinite.
Right.
Hey, who's got the time to come over and crunch some numbers, guys? Once I figured out how to do the math, I started doing it intuitively, knowing exactly what number would come next, here and here and here and here, because it follows the part one of this episode that we were talking about, which is my helical discovery of creature stacking in the order of plasma physics and material coming into and out of existence. This is the Dougherty set. And I discovered a very simple pentagonal, and it doesn't have to do with everyone using like the dodecahedron and the tetrahedron. You know, like these are concepts that are real. And there's also the not polygons, polytopes. There's a bunch of different polytopes that are real and that spin inside of and outside of the construction of these Birkeland currents. And this is the living circuits of life. This is the living water of life. This is how living creatures stack in an arrangement that transcends an order that we know that there's that there's a lot more meaning to life and a lot more intelligent design to the structure of what's going on.
Right.
So if I were to bust out my book and show you the exact numbers of this space-time DNA, for lack of a better term, because I can't think of a better term right now.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's broken up. Go ahead.
I have a question.
No, go ahead, Robert.
In your first column, which is your generating seed column, I'm just wondering what sort of result would occur if the number sequence was always prime. So as you go 1, 3, and so on down the first column, whether if that number was prime, what sort of mechanism would occur as a result? And in terms of this, I think there's an algorithmic solution to generating the next number. And,
yeah.
Although you're using Excel, G-numeric would be a better solution because it's much more accurate, or Mathematica. You need to get in contact with Roy and you know.
Well, there's a simple mathematical equation that I can put in, and the whole set would fill itself out.
Yeah,
so I just don't know that. I just don't know that equation.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if you get in contact with Roy with the email address I gave you, he might be able to build you a Mathematica template structure that does this for you with a great deal more precision.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I was doing this all by hand and calculator, and I know if it's right or wrong because I know the DNA structure. If it should be an even number or an odd number, then I go through and proof correct it. And but it's a very beautiful strand. And then once this is how we're going to understand the chirality of probably the living matter and the baryonic matter versus the inorganic matter.
One word of warning, though, if getting Roy to aid you in this process, just make sure his mathematics that he provides in the Mathematica programming process is correct. Easy to make mistakes.
Yeah. There's. I was trying.
Diagrams direct from Mathematica can diagram things, so you can produce some of your imagery work.
Well, I should be able to just iterate a function over and over and over, and it should build the Dougherty set, like iterating the Julia set over and over and over builds the Mandelbrot set.
Yeah. That's
what is. So if I just take this chart to the right person who knows how to use either Excel or whatever's going on here, it's a simple iterative function of doubling the number that's previous to it. So it's not that hard.
It's easy to do in this.
Yeah, it's not. Right.
All I'm saying is that Roy has access and knowledge of how to build a Mathematica equivalent. And
I would love that.
Mathematica has some ability to produce a rendition, emotional rendition or animation or pictures from it. But yeah.
Guys, I'm sorry, I've got to jump off. I've got something I got to
I'm going to have to disappear as well.
Freaking 3.5 hours almost.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disappear. Otherwise, I'll miss tomorrow morning's
sleep in through it.
Presentation. Yeah, I don't. I'd like to be there for discussion with Steve. Anyway, guys, enjoy the future discussion. I'll catch up with this later on.
Cheers, Robert.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Buddy, thanks, man. I appreciate you sharing this with me, man.
You're very welcome.
Very amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to get it all laid out, and I mean I've been drawing it for a while, but today I'm actually gonna go deep into some new places that I haven't gone, which is going to be exciting.
Do you see vertically going horizontally, not vertically, but horizontally, that the numbers are just doubling each time, isn't it?
That's all that's happening. Yeah, that's what I said.
But then you're seeing these patterns that are created inside of that doubling, no matter what.
Yes. Yeah, dang. And it's like everything. It's like it's so beautiful for me to finally be able to visualize, and I'm gonna draw a drawing today that shows probably the 7th gate and the 1st gate, the 7th gate here, and the 1st gate here. But when you look at 69, what's that first one? 137, 1 over 137.
That's your 37 right there.
Yeah.
That's my 69.
1 over 137. Everybody's been wondering that all throughout history.
Yeah, I was football. In football, that was my football number in high school. And then cancer. I'm a cancer, so it's also I always wore the necklace 69 everywhere I went. And then when I got into the military, every time we deployed, I would carve 69 in my head as a mohawk, but the number 69 is a mohawk. So
that was so awesome. So
yeah.
I had to show you that because I remember you telling me that. And then you go up here, and you try to find the gate of 137 and where it's by.
Uh-huh.
So I go up here and I look for 138, right? 138 is right here. And what's right next to it?
Bang.
69. Bam. There's your 69. Man. Yeah, 69 and 137 are 1 over 137 are directly interconnected. I found that out last night. I'm glad to show you that. The 69th Birkeland current is.
Wonder what that ratio is. Is that you know what I mean? What's that ratio?
I don't know. Someone's gonna know the math, probably. Hopefully.
Yeah,
that's why. In my book, I'm doing the universe game. We're already doing it on the show. That everybody's gonna be doing this.
Right.
It's gonna be endless, and it's like a game that won't stop. It's more addictive than any game that's ever been built. Because we're going to make this, and we're going to see it. We're going to design it. You're going to do math of it. Other people are going to do science of it. I mean, this is just the beginning. Yeah, it's a game.
It's a toy.
Game.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good stuff. So, man.
Yeah.
Dang. I hate that I got to jump off, man. I'm sorry. Dang.
It's good. It's good. It's been a good show. Man.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon, brother. Be good.
All right, brother. Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
The geometric view is love is watching product. Love is watching being. Thank you for doing that. Keep your eyeballs out. Pay attention. There's a lot going down this year. Be vigilant. Be mindful. Be insightful. Be loving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being kind. Share the love. Spread the love. Become the love. Amen. Thank you for being here for episode 76, season 7 of the Geometric View. We have much travels to do, and so much more transformation to go through together. Thank you for growing with us, and please share the information with everyone that you know, so as to grow into the beings of light that we are called to be. Amen. Praise the Lord Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. Blessings on your week. We'll see you next week.
Through the grimiest, through the grittiest of life, I'm there. I'm there. Through the grimiest and the grittiest of life, I'm there. Through the grimiest and the grittiest of life, I'm there. Through the grimiest and the grittiest of life, I'm there. mouth seems life and death. All of us. We have hope. Live your life for the cause. Love life. Live it to the fullest.
Eyes all over the wall, eyes all over your body. Can I just see straight through with transparent golden scaling? The largest of the edifice embark on this because this is the journey. The journey is life. Take hold. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud.
Join us in the fight for Christ, in the fight to save lives. Surprise, submersible, so fast, the first, the last of baptism. Need to say more. Pay attention like the marrow in your bones, arrow in your back, arrow in your lungs, zero into the back, tertiary Christian neuron, synapses and narrow endurance into eternity. I'm a courier, a charismatic attitude, modern meters even meter, it might even be fun. Cider indeed, need nerds, you need nerds, need a virtue, need to be a reason. Feasibility to be a reason to be clean and sober, keys, open doors, signs of directions. Be the carrier of candlesticks, the man that brought you change. Every second you ride, until you rivet, you pivot, potential, you curve and cat. Could be cold, could be copycat, could be copy corpse, could be Schrodinger's best. Could be micro-actor, Mackie, normal, open-minded, itsy-bitsy, freaking huge, a universal supermassive aspect of attached awareness. Aware of this all?
Collaborative consumption.
Are you aware of this all?
Collaborative consumption. The new thing consumption. Collaborative consumption.
Get up now! Out of the boat! Drop! Where did this up? We don't got about a girl. But about it, it's not about a goddess of fear. Get up, what's up? Get out of town, comes. We're playing up, little butts up.
I'm in search of, I'm in earth love, I'm in living life, I'm in living color, I'm in air drop, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing.